These gods of the Pokemon world hold power over the very fabric of its universe, and they're the strongest Pokemon there are. So today, we're going to be ranking every single legendary Pokemon from weakest to most powerful. First up, the rules. Rather than focusing on their strength in-game, we'll instead focus on how strong they are canonically in the lore of the Pokemon world. These are legendary Pokemon after all. It makes sense to use legends to rank them. We'll also be counting mythical Pokemon because they are technically a subset of legendaries, but we will not, however, be counting Ultra Beasts since it's debatable whether or not they are also a subset. So with that said, let's start off by looking at the so-called legendaries that are weaker than even regular Pokemon. This is the legendary D tier, and unfortunately our gold medal of weakness has to go to Cosmog and Cosmoem. To get the obvious out of the way, these two can eventually evolve into Solgaleo or Lunala. Two Pokemon who we won't see on this list for quite some time. Clearly, the power gap between these two sets is far too great to rationalize, let alone justify, ranking them together. So let's talk about these two first. While they can be used as a power source to open up an Ultra Wormhole, that's pretty much all they can do. And they don't even have this power on their own anyway. The only notable thing to mention is that Cosmog and Cosmoem are both tied for the lightest and heaviest Pokemon in existence, respectively. Add on the fact that Cosmoem is also tied for the smallest, and they serve as clear and irrefutable proof that physics does not exist in the Pokemon world through the principle of mass conservation alone. In a similar vein, we're giving the silver medal of weakness to Kubfu. While not nearly on the same scale as our previous entrants, the power gap between Kubfu and Urshifu is still significant enough for us to count them as separate entities. Besides, with how few legendary Pokemon evolve anyway, we can afford to split a few entries here and there. Regardless, the whole point of Kubfu is that it's weak and inexperienced. It's still in basic training to the point where it has yet to decide which style to practice or which of the towers of two fists to train in. And while it can get stronger through training, the amount of effort it needs to put in and the fact that it needs a strong trainer to work with holds it back significantly. Third from the bottom of weakness, we have the Sea Drifter Pokemon, Phione. Despite its reputation amongst the community, Phione isn't quite useless on its own, unlike the previous three. That being said, its powers are still a far cry from being considered legendary, so to speak. It spends its days floating lazily in the ocean, using its natural camouflage to avoid the detection of predators. The only thing that spares it from dropping any lower is its connection to Manaphy, which gives it access to mind manipulation and other psychic powers. It isn't quite on the same level as its cousin's Heart Swap, but it still has access to their new move, Take Heart. Next up, we have our first mythical with the Melody Pokemon, Meloetta. It's somewhat impressive that a Pokemon who can freely change its form ends up so low on our list, but here it is. As the name implies, Meloetta's power is focused primarily on music, whether that be singing beautiful songs in its aria form that can control the emotions of those who hear it, or performing graceful dances in its pirouette form that can inspire those around it. The main issue is that the source of its power, its signature move Relic Song, is actually a lost art to the point that, up until recently, even Meloetta itself could not remember it, and had to be taught the move via a special move tutor. We have to give our next spot to the artificial Pokemon Magearna. While it may be a nightmare in competitive, in universe, Magearna isn't really all that powerful. Its most notable attribute is its Soul Heart, the artificial soul that makes up the actual Pokemon, while its metal body is more of a mechanical fursuit than anything else. Though it may be artificial, the Soul Heart gives Magearna a strong sense of empathy, giving it the ability to feel the emotions of every living thing around it, which makes it a great caretaker, but aside from that, it doesn't have much going for it in the power department. Keeping the theme going, next we have the Gratitude Pokemon, Shaman. Like the previous few entrants, Shaman does have some level of power, but not that much more than other regular Pokemon. It has the power to purify toxins, fertilize soil, and germinate flowers and other plants in an instant, which is impressive for the scale, but isn't exactly unique to Shaman. Most other grass types have similar abilities, so enough of them would be able to do the same thing on their own. Aside from that, the only notable thing about Shaman is its Sky form, which grants it the ability to fly, which, gee, what an upgrade. It's not like 90% of this list can do that already without a special form change. And our final spot in this tier will have to go to the Seafaring Pokemon Manaphy. For the purpose of this list, Manaphy is basically just Phione, but more so. It wanders the seas, traveling great distances to return to the cold seafloor it was born in, and is overall very susceptible to changes in its environment. The difference here is that Manaphy's powers are more developed than Phione's, to the point where it can link the minds of two individuals and change their perspectives in the form of its former signature move, Heart Swap. It accomplishes this in a way not unlike Magearna, coincidentally the only other Pokemon capable of using the move, through its hypersensitive empathic link to those around it, giving Manaphy a clear idea of what those individuals are thinking. And that's really what it has going for it, and it's still a bit too floaty for its own good in general. With the D tier wrapped up, let's move into our next section. These legendaries fit into the C tier. Starting off, we have a double entry with Blastrier and Spectrier. While they too are both nightmares in competitive battling, these My Little Pony rejects aren't all that special in the actual canon. Sure, they're fairly powerful in general and are on the upper end of strength as far as ice and ghost types are, respectively. But as far as legendary Pokemon are concerned, these two aren't that special. They're basically just mean, tough horses, and all the legends surrounding them are solely in relation to their connection to Calyrex being able to tame them. But at least the narrative takes some time to establish them as powerful Pokemon in general, which is what earns them a spot in the bottom of our C tier. In a similar vein, we're giving our next spot to both Heatran and Volcanion. We're gonna rank these two together because they're basically the same Pokemon, aside from the whole secondary typing thing, of course. They're both powerful Fire-type Pokemon, harnessing the power of the Earth's core and underwater volcanoes, respectively. That said, like the previous entry, both seem to be lacking in the Legends department, as there's almost nothing that distinguishes them from other equally powerful Fire types. The only thing that gives us anything to work with is the fact that the Magma Stone exists, which has the power to calm and control Heatran, and which is said Heatran will fiercely protect. However, since it's considered canon that multiple Heatran exist and that not all of them are connected to a Magma Stone, this sorta brings us back to square one. But let's talk about the Wushu Pokemon, Urshifu. Having completed its training at one of the Towers of Two Fists, both forms of Urshifu have become masters in their chosen style. They've honed their powers and martial prowess to perfection and use their skills to protect those they hold dear. This puts them, well, to put it bluntly, on the same level as just about any other fully evolved fighting type Pokemon. They don't have any special powers or legendary feats that would put them above other generally strong Pokemon, aside from training in a secret art that few others have access to. Similarly, we'll be giving our next spot to both Type Null and Silvally. Like the other man-made Pokemon on this list, Silvally and its de-evolution Type Null were created to be a weapon, specifically one to be used against the Ultra Beasts using its signature RKS system to exploit their weaknesses. However, the scientists were unable to control it, and they were forced to place a limiter helmet on it, shutting off its RKS system until the Type Null can control its powers properly. That said, that's about all that its helmet does to limit Type Null's power, so we can place it alongside its evolution, Silvally, in terms of ranking. That said, out of the three man-made Pokemon on this list, Silvally is easily the weakest, not only in physical strength, but also in its RKS system being dependent on having access to a full set of memories to access its full potential. Next, we have the rogue monkey Pokemon Zarude. In keeping with the theme of this section, Zarude is fairly strong in general, though not quite up to what should be considered legendary standards. For that matter, the fact that they live in packs of multiple Zarude is shaky enough grounds for being a legendary, but that's neither here nor there. Their most notable feature is their ability to heal others, something which is rare for grass types and almost unheard of in dark types. Moving on to the Thunderclap Pokemon Zorora. Unlike other electric type Pokemon, Zorora doesn't have an internal organ to produce its own electricity. Whether this makes Zorora stronger or weaker is up for debate, as while this makes it inherently weaker than other electric Pokemon, the fact that it can still generate enough electricity is an impressive feat on its own. What isn't up for debate is just how blindingly fast Zorora is, being able to move at the speed of a lightning bolt and tear into its prey with its electrified claws. Our next spot will be going to another group entry with the Legendary Titans, the first of our legendary trios, or rather a quintet in this case. The Titans are mostly special for what they are as opposed to how strong they are. As beings made of pure stone, ice, metal, electricity, and draconic energy, they have a level of mastery over their respective element. Of course, that's not even remotely special, as pretty much every Pokemon has that ability to at least some extent. However, the Titans do take this to a level that few other Pokemon of their respective types can match. For instance, Regice can survive being submerged in lava without melting. Registeel's body is so hard that it cannot be scratched by anything, and Regidrago is rumored to have the powers of every Dragon-type Pokemon in existence. That last one has some implications regarding several dragons we've yet to cover on this list, but we're gonna say that the lack of special abilities across the board for the Titans means there's some limitations as to what that statement entails. Now, from one sort of, but not really trio to another, next we have the Swords of Justice. While we're still a few entries away from the truly special powers, these four managed to land a spot this high mainly for having actual legends about their strength. Countless tales tell of their heroic deeds, from rescuing Pokemon from natural disasters to waging war against the humans who would do them harm. They accomplish this mainly through the power of teamwork, utilizing their respective strengths to their advantage while covering for each other's weaknesses. However, individually, they are not that much stronger than other fully evolved Pokemon, and even as a group, they're nothing particularly special, at least when it comes to legendaries. But to cover a proper trio, let's look at the Loyal 3 next. Like our previous entry, these three rely on the power of teamwork to get what they want, having some of the most impressive strength, brains, and beauty of all Pokemon. They'll often gang up on Pokemon weaker than them, all while mooching off the goodwill of others to get even stronger. However, there are three major flaws that keep them from ranking any higher. The first is that they rely heavily on the legends surrounding them to maintain their image. Legends which are, to put it mildly, a load of Granbull Shinotic. Second, while they are threatening as a group, individually they're nothing special and can be taken care of very easily, even after powering up with the special Moochie. Finally, and most importantly, their powers are not actually their own. They were given their abilities by another Pokemon, which we won't see on this list for quite some time. For that reason, the lousy three have to do some serious heavy lifting just to make it up this high. Next, we have the Gloom Dweller Pokemon, Marshadow. Being an extremely shy Pokemon, Marshadow spends most of its time hiding in the shadows of others. You'd think that would be grounds for a lower ranking than this, but Marshadow really puts in the work to turn this negative into a plus. It studies the movements of those around it while it hides, and through mimicry, it copies and advances their skills to enhance its martial prowess. It can't copy any special powers, obviously, but through this method, it is capable of mastering any martial art faster and more effectively than the most skilled masters of said art. But now we finally get to the OG legendary trio, the Legendary Birds. And for the record, this will include both the Kanto and Galar variants of the trio. Aside from the whole harmony of fire, ice, and lightning thing, or perhaps maybe the harmony of fighting psychic and dark, depending on your preferred flavor, we hate to say it, but there really isn't that much special about them. Their abilities are fairly standard for Pokemon of their respective types, though the Galarian birds have some features that reference their Cantonian counterparts. The main difference is that their abilities are actually stronger on average than others of their particular type. For example, Kanto Zapdos can cause thunderstorms just by flapping its wings, and Galarian Articuno can use its psychic powers to freeze living and non-living things on a molecular level. Then there's Cantonian Moltres, which is basically immortal so long as it can find an active volcano to dive into and burn its body to restore and revive itself, much like a phoenix. But we're finally getting to the more substantial part of our list. These are the somewhat extraordinary legendary Pokemon, and we're placing them in the B tier. Let's kick this section off with the Lunar Duo. From this point onwards, most Pokemon will have some sort of special power that sets them apart from regular Pokemon. In the case of Darkrai and Cresselia, their powers are tied to the realm of nightmares and pleasant dreams, and the ability to manifest them in harmful and helpful ways, respectively. Darkrai is the stronger of the two, both in its combat prowess and its ability to spread unending nightmares to those around it simply by existing. However, while Darkrai is better offensively, Cresselia is more defensive, being able to dispel the nightmares created by the former and healing others to boot. Ultimately, these two are a dynamic duo, and you can't take one without the other, so the specific nature of Cresselia's warding power drags them down a bit. But let's move on to the Legendary Beasts. Their most notable feature as a group is the fact that they died in the burned tower before being revived by Ho-Oh. However, that's more of a feat for the latter than anything, so we can't count that for these three. What we can count for them is that each of them individually has powers that far exceed those of ordinary Pokemon. Raikou and Entei are the most destructive of the three, being able to freely control storm clouds and volcanic eruptions at will. Meanwhile, Suicune is more protective, being able to walk on water and instantly purify any body of water that it touches. It's also described as being the closest to Ho-Oh among its trio, and even has some sort of connection to the unknown. Next, we have the Paleozoic Pokemon Genesect. The second of our man-made Pokemon on this list, Genesect manages to succeed, where Silvally had failed mainly due to motivating factors. Whereas Silvally was created to be a specialized tool for an ostensibly altruistic organization, Genesect was made as a weapon of mass destruction for an evil team bent on world domination. Additionally, when the project was cancelled by N, the scientist who eventually completed it poured all his frustration into making Genesect as strong as possible, even before being revived and modified. It was already an apex predator and a powerful hunter. However, with the added cannon and high-speed flight configuration, it has become a much more potent threat to people and Pokemon alike. So let that be a lesson. If you want to make something more dangerous, give it a gun and see what happens. In a similar vein, we're giving our next spot to the DNA Pokemon Deoxys. While not a man-made Pokemon, it is an extraterrestrial one, so it's not going to have any special powers over our world. Still, that doesn't stop Deoxys from being a potent threat in its own right. As a mutated virus, its body is incredibly malleable, being able to transform itself into various forms to adapt to its environment and survive in this foreign world. It's also virtually indestructible, as it can instantly regenerate its body as long as the crystallized core remains intact. This, along with its ability to change its forms at will, makes Deoxys a dangerous Pokemon even without any godlike powers. Next, let's take a look at the Paradox Duo. You know Paradox Pokemon are pretty tough, aren't they? Not only are they stronger than average than modern Pokemon, but they get even tougher when under the sun or in electric terrain, respectively. And nowhere is this more clear than with the strongest of the bunch, Koraidon and Miraidon, who are able to automatically set up the field conditions which make them stronger. Oh, and if you're wondering why we're talking exclusively about game mechanics instead of lore here, well, that's because there's really nothing here to speak of. Aside from the ones we meet in the story, any information we have about these two is mostly hearsay from unreliable sources. Still, for how powerful Paradox Pokemon are in general, we feel confident placing the Winged King and Iron Serpent this high up. On to another group entry with the Forces of Nature. These four seem to represent opposing forces, with Tornadus and Thundurus being more destructive and Landorus and Enamorus being more constructive. And to be perfectly frank, it's the latter two that really carries this group this far. While the former two are certainly in the upper echelon of flying and electric Pokemon, their abilities are still firmly rooted in the basic rules of their respective types. On the other hand, not only was Landorus able to subdue and punish them for their misdeeds, but it and Enamorus were able to heal the land and fertilize the fields that were destroyed in the wake of their feuding, bringing spring and good harvest to the people. Ultimately, these two are doing some serious heavy lifting to bring this group into the legendary side of this list, but at least they have some actual legends to help them out. From one quartet to another, we have the Treasures of Ruin. Born from artifacts imbued with negative emotions, these four are almost single-handedly responsible for destroying the ancient kingdom of Paldea in the past. Their very existence evokes destruction, leaving trails of ruin everywhere they go. This can either be indirectly, such as Wuxian and Chiyu, destroying the immediate area just by existing, or directly, like Qianpo and Tinglu, triggering devastating natural disasters on a regular basis. In either case, the destructive potential of these fearsome four was so great that they needed to be sealed away for the safety of everyone until the end of time, until a child with a bicycle lizard comes along, whichever happens first. Moving on to the Eon Duo. When you think about it, it's kind of inspiring that the first Pokemon capable of Mega Evolving barely made it into the top half of the list. However, even taking their Mega forms out of the equation, Latios and Latios are still more than capable on their own. This is primarily due to the existence of the Soul Dew, a protective item containing the spirit of a deceased Eon, granting its power to its next of kin. This, alongside with their sight-sharing ability, gives them the ability to look after one another and share their powers, in order to protect those they care about. And when you combine this with the aforementioned Mega Evolution, this duo easily earns a spot this high up. Next, we have the Subjugation Pokemon Pecharunt. Despite not being a true Psychic-type Pokemon, Pecharunt has a level of mind-controlling powers that put most actual Psychics to shame. As the true mastermind behind the Loyal 3, it was the one to give them their respective powers. It accomplishes this through the use of its Toxic Chain, which draws out the latent powers and desires of the wearer in exchange for placing them fully under Pecharunt's control. It then uses its Toxic Moochie to turn anyone who eats it into mindless puppets for it to use as it sees fit. These puppets then help spread the Moochie out to more and more people and Pokemon to help amass an army to serve Pecharunt's will, and if left unchecked, could potentially conquer entire nations through this method. Rounding out this Momotaro story, we have the mask Pokemon, Ogerpon. While it has the ability to draw out the power of various masks, particularly those laced with terrestrialization energy, Ogerpon's true strength lies in its accomplishments in battle. After losing its companion and most of its masks to the Loyal 3, it dons its last mask and proceeds to battle them on its own, defeating all three and subsequently halting Pecharunt's ambitions. And really, Ogerpon's placement on this list is really that simple. Pecharunt is one of the stronger entries on this list, and Ogerpon is able to one-up it in terms of strength, at least indirectly. And rounding out the B tier, we have the Jewel Pokemon Diancie. As a mutation of Carbink, Diancie has the power to create diamonds from nothing by compressing carbon found in the air between its hands. Pokemon have been shown to do some crazy things in general, but this is on a whole nother level. For further context, diamonds are generally created at a temperature of around 2500 degrees Fahrenheit and at a pressure of over 825,000 pounds per square inch, in a process that usually takes several months minimum to produce a single tiny diamond. As if that wasn't enough, which it comfortably is. Diancie also has the ability to Mega Evolve, which amplifies this ability to insane proportions. The only reason why it falls short of our A tier is because we've reserved it for the more godlike Pokemon, which Diancie sadly just falls slightly short of. And with that said, we now move into the actually legendary section, where the true gods of the Pokemon world reside. This is the A tier. Starting out this section, we have the Tower Duo. We've touched on this earlier, but it bears repeating how Ho-Oh has the power to bring other creatures back from the dead. Having rescued and revived the legendary beasts from the burned tower, this one feat gives Ho-Oh some of the most potent healing powers of all Pokemon. However, aside from this one moment, that's about all it gets as far as special powers. It does have the ability to give eternal happiness to those who see it, but that's mostly hearsay up to interpretation, and wildly inferior to its ability to resurrect the dead. By comparison, Lugia has no known special powers to speak of that match Ho-Oh's true resurrection, but it is canonically said to be as powerful as the latter, so we can assume it must have something. Next, we have to talk about the Guardian Deities. These four collectively make up the protectors of Alola, each being the guardian of their respective islands. While they've fought each other occasionally in the past, their primary focus is defending their islands from outside threats, including Ultra Beasts, villainous teams, and most importantly for this list, the Light Trio. When Solgaleo and Lunala arrived in Alola, the Guardian Deities fought against them to protect their homes. While the latter did lose, the former were impressed enough to bestow the Tapunium Z on the Guardians and entrust them with protecting the Cosmog while they grew up. Then, when Necrozma appeared and stole the light of the world, the Guardians teamed up using the power of the Z Crystals, reclaimed the stolen light, and banished Necrozma back from whence it came. In a similar vein, we're giving our next spot to the Hero Duo. Like our previous entrant, Zacian and Zamazenta make it this high up almost exclusively due to their accomplishments in battle. In this case, they're almost single-handedly responsible for defeating Eternatus and bringing the Darkest Day to an end. Keep in mind that this also comes at a time when Dynamax Pokemon were still a foreign concept, and were a lot harder to deal with. And with all that in mind, the fact that they were able to defeat all the out-of-control Dynamax Pokemon on top of Eternatus definitely earns them a much higher spot. Now we have the duo of Reshiram and Zekrom. We won't be counting Kyurem in this entry for reasons we'll explain in a bit. Having some of the strongest fire and electric powers of all, these two are capable of scorching the earth and are thought to represent the power of fusion. And no, we're not talking about the polymerization style fusion with Kyurem to merge into a new form. We'll get to that later. No, we're talking about nuclear fusion on an atomic level and the release of energy that such a process creates. This means that these two are literally the Pokemon equivalent of an atomic bomb, or more accurately, a nuclear reactor, and the implications of such power simply cannot be ignored. For our 5th group entry in a row, we have both Jirachi and Hoopa sharing a spot. Now, to explain our reasoning for lumping these two together, let's take a look at Jirachi first. While it's said to have the ability to grant wishes, in reality it has a handy little trick to get around having true wish fulfillment abilities: teleportation. Rather than creating objects or bending the universe to its will, Jirachi will simply teleport things in from elsewhere when someone makes a wish. That said, there doesn't seem to be any limitation to this power, so it could theoretically take anything it wants from anywhere in the world. This is basically identical to Hoopa's power of opening portals across dimensions, and taking anything or anyone it wants from any corner of the multiverse. This even extends to other legendary Pokemon, meaning that a lot of the strengths of the rest of this list extend to these two as well. Still, this is an extension of the power of those Pokemon, not Jirachi or Hoopa specifically, so there's only so much this can do to bump these two up our ranking. Next, let's take a look at the High King Pokemon Calyrex. It's really impressive how the mechanic that makes Calyrex strong in-game, that being fusing with Glastrier and Spectrier, ends up being the least impressive of its feats. Its powers are strong enough to put almost any other psychic Pokemon to shame. It can dominate the mind of any individual in its range, relocate an entire forest with its ecosystem intact, and see all the possible pasts, presents, and futures simultaneously. It can instantly fertilize barren fields and have them grow crops instantly. It can stop a meteor from destroying the planet. It can even take the powers of its chosen mounts, amplify them, and make them its own. That said, all of this comes with the caveat that Calyrex must receive its powers through the prayers of its followers. When the people stop believing in it, Calyrex's powers slowly disappear. And since this all takes place after Calyrex is all but a forgotten memory by the people of the Crown Tundra, we unfortunately can't rank it any higher. From one fusing Pokemon to another, next is the boundary Pokemon Kyurem. Going back to the fusion theme of the Tao Trio, Kyurem is the culmination of that theme, being able to literally fuse with the other two. It's theorized that this is due to Kyurem being the original dragon of the Unova region. When Reshiram and Zekrom split from it, Kyurem was left with some residual DNA from the former two, allowing it to use Absifusion to absorb them back and fill the void. Interestingly, while Kyurem is neither a fire nor electric Pokemon, when fused with Reshiram or Zekrom respectively, its powers over those elements far exceed those of its base forms, kept in check only by clashing with its existing ice powers. That said, it also has full control over said ice powers, so it can easily use this to its advantage and unleash the full potential of its immense power. That said, without Reshiram or Zekrom to fuse with, Kyurem is slightly weaker than the other two. Its frozen body is hard to control, and its ice powers don't have the same level of mastery as the fire and electric powers of the other two. Still, its aggressive disposition makes it plenty dangerous on its own, and it can outperform its counterparts at their own game. So Kyurem still easily ranks higher than them on principle. Similar to the above, we're giving our next spot to Solgaleo and Lunala. Again, we're not counting Necrozma here for what should be obvious reasons at this point. Nonetheless, as beings of light, Solgaleo and Lunala were the ones who brought light to Alola, resulting in the ancient kings worshipping them as gods. They also have the power to open ultra wormholes and traverse through ultra space, and unlike their pre-evolutions, this ability is innate and able to be used at will. The only real downside here is that Necrozma sort of hard counters these two, as they're both ineffective against and often targeted by it. That said, one Pokemon with an advantage against what are otherwise basically gods doesn't quite detract enough from these two for us to rank it any lower. Moving on to the time travel Pokemon Celebi. This one is going to be simple because the Pokedex category basically says it all. As the tin says, Celebi has the power to travel through time, and with that comes all the paradox-inducing abilities that come with the territory. It functions as a guardian of the forest and does what it can to protect both its home and the timeline. Whenever it senses an anomaly in the timeline, it travels to that time to fix the problem before the timeline falls apart. It can even coexist with its past and future selves and join forces with them to deal with a greater threat or revive a fallen malevolent incarnation of itself. Additionally, it has the power to purify its surroundings, causing plants to flourish in its presence, and being able to dispel the darkness in the hearts of shadow Pokemon. That being said, Celebi is a bit more passive than its position would suggest, as it's established that it generally avoids time periods of strife, which is exactly what a Guardian of the Forest should be going after. Still, wasted potential aside, the ability to travel through time is just too reality warping to ignore. Next we have the Terra Pokemon Terapagos. While its normal form is small and weak, Terapagos is never in its normal form when it counts. It's the progenitor of both the stellar Terra type as well as the terrestrial phenomenon as a whole, being able to absorb terrestrial energy to form a crystalline shell to protect itself. It uses this power to survive deep underground and avoid certain extinction by going into a million-year state of hibernation, hidden inside of a crystal. Additionally, it appears to have some control over time, being able to bring people in from the past as well as power time machines used to bring Paradox Pokemon to the modern era. To add to this, when it's exposed to terrestrial energy itself, it transforms into its stellar form, a form so full of energy that it can resist even the Master Ball and threaten to collapse Paldea's ecosystem with its very existence. With that amount of power in such a small Pokemon, we'd be crazy to rank it any lower. But now we move on to the Aura Trio. From here on out, the power levels have gone so far beyond rational thought that the competition becomes extremely tight. Nowhere does that become more apparent than the Aura Trio, where the power to give and take life indiscriminately doesn't even crack the top 10. This is primarily due to two reasons. One is the fact that Xerneas and Yveltal are in direct opposition to one another in both concept and motive, so they tend to cancel one another out. In fact, Xerneas will specifically follow Yveltal solely to undo the loss of life that the latter spreads with its very presence. And the other is that Zygarde exists, and as an emissary of order, it serves to keep the two in check. Not only is it specifically tailored to cancel out the powers of the rest of its trio, but when it's in complete form, with all its cells, it easily overpowers them and most of the Pokemon on this list. This would normally be grounds for ranking Zygarde above the other two, but not only is it generally more passive than other legendary Pokemon, but even its complete form can't compete with the rest of this list. So let that sink in. Entering our top 10, we have the Colossal Pokemon Regigigas. You know we're taking the lore seriously when Regigigas lands in the top 10 instead of dead freaking last. It has incredible endurance, being able to survive both boiling lava and freezing temperatures easily. It also has immense strength, which is used to tow the continents to where they are today. However, all that pales in comparison to its greatest power of all, the ability to create life. Regigigas was the one to create the 5 legendary titans from inanimate materials and imbued them with life and sentience of their own. Keep in mind, this isn't bringing someone back to life like Ho-Oh or Xerneas. This is bestowing life on an inanimate object where no life existed before. The implications of this are absolutely staggering. So we're gonna go ahead and ignore slow start here and give Regigigas a spot this high up. Now we have to take a look at the Weather Trio. And you know what's more impressive than towing continents? How about creating them? That's the main claim to fame for the Weather Trio, being the ones to shape the world as we know it. Groudon shaped the land, Kyogre shaped the seas, and Rayquaza created the atmosphere while keeping the previous two in check. What's more, while their powers have waned over the years, when exposed to a source of primal energy, such as the orbs or a keystone, they can unlock their primal forms, or mega evolution in Rayquaza's case, and have the power to expand their domains once again. The only reason why these three aren't ranked any higher is that their powers are limited exclusively to the material world, which just doesn't compare to the metaphysical powers that these next few entries have. Speaking of which, our next spot will be going to the victory Pokemon, Victini. It may seem anticlimactic going from 3 super ancient titans to a small rabbit, but hear us out. Victini has the power to bring victory to those it deems worthy. How or what that entails is never really made clear, but it seems to be as infallible as it is potent. More impressive, however, is the fact that Victini is also a source of infinite energy, which it's able to share with its friends and allies. While we tend to conflate the concept of infinity with just a large number, it's worth remembering just how incomprehensible the idea of truly infinite energy really is. The applications of this are equally vast, so for this power alone, we're gonna give Victini this high of a spot. Similar to the above, we have the gigantic Pokemon Eternatus. Like Victini, Eternatus is a source of effectively infinite energy, being the source of the Wishing Stones and Galar particles that allow Pokemon to Dynamax. The main difference between the two, however, is in their application. Not only does Eternatus have the power to control the Dynamax phenomenon on its own, but it also has the power to absorb the energy it releases, allowing it to revert to its true Eternamax form. In this form, Eternatus has a power level that far exceeds that of any Pokemon in existence, at least in-game. It has the highest base stat total in the game, beating out the second place finishers of Mega Rayquaza and Mega Mewtwo by almost 50%. And yeah, I know we aren't looking at game statistics for this list, but with a gap that large, we have to at least acknowledge it. That said, its current form is more reasonable in the power department, at least as far as this list is concerned. And just missing out on the top 5, or our S tier, we have the Lake Trio. These three were created by Arceus, and each make up the forces that govern the mind: knowledge, emotion, and willpower. They collectively use their powers to create the human spirit, giving birth to intelligent life in the Pokemon world. Additionally, they have the power to control their respective aspects of the mind, being able to revoke them from whomever they want at will. Anyone that looks into Uxie's eyes is rendered brain dead. Those who touch Mesprit become completely emotionless, and those who hurt Azelf literally lose the will to live. Additionally, they have the power to create the Red Chain, an item that gives the wielder the power to keep Dialga or Palkia in check, which in and of itself is an incredible feat. That said, they themselves are a bit too squishy for their own good. Aside from their mind-altering powers, they are fairly weak on their own, as shown when Team Galactic was able to capture them with little effort. Still, for being the creators of Spirit, we can give them a spot just outside of our top 5. And with that said, we get to the very top of our legendary list, the top 5 most powerful legendaries, the S tier. And our 5th place spot goes to the genetic Pokemon Mewtwo. The third and strongest of the man-made Pokemon, Mewtwo is a genetically enhanced clone of Mew. It was made to be a weapon for Team Rocket, who wanted to create the world's strongest Pokemon, and they succeeded. Well, okay, not quite, since there's 4 more entries left, but it's still a cool line regardless. Still, they were able to get pretty close, as a creature made solely for battle. Mewtwo's offensive capabilities have been enhanced to the max. It's one of the most savage Pokemon in existence, capable of thinking only of destruction of its foes. It has some of the strongest psychic powers in existence, being able to completely crush a skyscraper with just a thought. On top of that, Mewtwo also has not 1, but 2 Mega Evolutions, each of which amplify its battle prowess even further. It may not have any special abilities in comparison with the rest of this section, but the sheer raw power and battle prowess it does have more than makes Mewtwo a god among Pokemon in its own right. Just barely missing out on the podium, our next spot goes to the Creation Trio. When a group known as the Creation Trio doesn't even make the top 3 in terms of power, you know things have gotten too far out of hand. Like the Lake Trio, these 3 were created by Arceus to keep the universe in balance, each governing a specific aspect of the very fabric of reality. And yes, that includes Giratina, who may have been banished to the Distortion world for its violence, but still utilizes its dominion over antimatter to maintain balance in the real world. Meanwhile, Dialga and Palkia maintain order by ensuring that time moves normally, and space remains stable. If you think these would be insane powers to have that would normally be a guarantee for a top spot, then you'd be right. However, the top 3 are somehow even more ridiculous. The bronze medal of power has to go to the Prism Pokemon Necrozma. Like the rest of its trio, Necrozma is a being of light, providing a source of energy for its homeworld. Or at least it was until the ancient people of Ultra Megalopolis sought Necrozma's power for their own, stripping it of its light and leaving it in a state of constant pain. Since then, Necrozma constantly seeks more and more light to reclaim that which was lost, inevitably leaving despair and destruction in its wake. It absorbs all the light in its home dimension, the dimensions of the Ultra Beasts, and eventually tries to do the same to Alola. Where its real power comes from is in its ability to absorb other creatures of light, including Solgaleo and Lunala, giving it a source of infinite energy gain power. What's more, even when in this state, it still hungers for more light, continuing to absorb more and more light until it ultimately consumes all the light that it can find. It may be one thing to create the world, but it's a whole other thing to destroy all the worlds. So we must give Necrozma a spot in our top 3, only beaten out of the top spots by a few technicalities. The silver medal of power goes to the new species Pokemon Mew. Going from the destroyer of worlds to a squishy pink embryo seems a bit jarring, but most of you should have seen this one coming. As the progenitor of all Pokemon, Mew has the DNA of every Pokemon in existence and can transform into any of them at will, including other legendary Pokemon. This means that Mew can have all the powers of every single Pokemon on this list, and potentially break the entire multiverse if it so chooses. Need to revive a fallen friend? Both Ho-Oh and Xerneas are right there. Want to go back in time to undo a certain mistake? Either Celebi or Dialga should do just fine. Even Necrozma, with all its universe-ending powers, is merely a simple transformation away, easily making Mew the strongest Pokemon we've covered thus far. And the only reason why it isn't number 1 is because there's still one more that even Mew can't copy. That's right, we're giving the gold medal of power to the alpha Pokemon, Arceus. Yeah, we know, not the most creative pick for our top spot, to give the literal creator deity the gold medal. But I mean, come on, surely it can't be that simple, right? In-game, it's only the 8th strongest Pokemon, and even in the lore, there are several Pokemon who should theoretically be able to take Arceus down. Heck, Arceus is a god of light, so something like Necrozma should be able to absorb and assimilate it. And even if that wasn't the case, Mew can still transform into Arceus anyway, so what gives? Well, at the end of the day, we don't know the full scope of Arceus' true power. As revealed in Legends Arceus, the Arceus we know today is merely a fraction of its true power, an avatar with which it can interact with the material world from whatever higher plane it exists on. And this avatar alone is strong enough to earn a spot in our top 3 on its own power. The fact that the real Arceus is exponentially stronger than this avatar is more than enough to give it the gold medal of strength, even ignoring its universe-creating powers. Aside from the starters, legendary Pokemon are among the most iconic of all time. And not just for their cool designs, but also for the lore surrounding them. And the big question is, how exactly are they all connected? And this is the legendary Pokemon family tree. Now, for the purpose of this video, we'll talk about how each of these legendaries are connected with one another. And our explanations can either be confirmed in-game or through some speculation. And what better place to start than the alpha Pokemon, Arceus? According to legend, Arceus hatched from an egg when there was nothing, and shaped the entire universe with its 1,000 arms. With its ability Multi-Type, it has the power to change its type that corresponds with the plate it's holding. It shows great care for the Pokemon world and its inhabitants, having protected the planet from events such as meteor showers, and shows compassion towards humans that treat it with kindness back. On the contrary, it shows no mercy towards those who betray it, going on violent rampages, and is known to hold long grudges. Because of its godly status, it has been worshipped in the Hisui region for millennia, with its nickname, the Almighty Sinnoh, being the basis of what Hisui would later be known as. Off to the side is the new species Pokemon, Mew. Mew is playful and childish, but at the same time harbors high intelligence and is quite resourceful and adaptable, being able to disappear at will. It's likely for this reason as to why so few people have actually seen it and why it was declared extinct for many years. In fact, it's believed to have been plentiful in numbers in the past. It wasn't until scientists discovered DNA of it in South America. Yeah, South America. It's actually mentioned in the Pokemon Mansion on Cinnabar Island. That confirmed it to still exist. Mew has unique DNA coding, making it able to transform into any Pokemon and use any move. And speaking of DNA, it has been said to contain the DNA of all Pokemon, with some scientists believing it to be the ancestor of all species. Though this is a bit curious considering Arceus created the entire universe, leaving Mew's relationship to it up in the air. Maybe it's a chicken and the egg type situation. I guess it's all up to interpretation. Now, directing our attention back to Arceus, it directly created 6 Pokemon when forming the universe. So you could say they're its children. The first 3 we'll be looking at are the Pokemon of myth, Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina. Dialga has power over time, being able to warp and travel through it. It's said that time began moving when it was born, and it flows every time its heart beats. Palkia, on the other hand, has power over space, being able to warp it, travel to faraway places in other dimensions, and even destroy it. A proverb states that its birth created the world's sky, and it's said that space becomes more stable every time it breathes. Both Pokemon have the power to create new universes by themselves or with each other. The Diamond and Pearl clans in the Hisui region worship Dialga and Palkia respectively, referring to them as, quote, the Almighty Sinnoh. Meanwhile, Giratina, representing antimatter, was banished to the Distortion World by Arceus for violent behavior. It's said to gaze upon the old world from its home in the Distortion World, which is the reverse side of the Pokemon world. Once holding a massive grudge against Arceus, it was willing to fight against it alongside Volo. After being defeated by a child from the future, it changed its ways and now helps to protect the universe from threats. All three Pokemon of Myth have origin forms that they retain in their home dimensions, or when holding their respective orbs, which are thought to be their true forms. Now onto the other trio that Arceus created, the Lake Guardians, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf, all thought to have hatched from the same egg. They each gave humans key abilities to survive. Uxie gave humans knowledge, Mesprit emotions, and Azelf willpower, and they can take these abilities away from those who disrespect them. After their creation, they went to live inside caverns at the bottom of Lakes Acuity, Verity, and Valor, respectively, hence their title of the Lake Guardians. The trio is also capable of creating and destroying the Red Chain, an item that's able to take control of Dialga and Palkia, and they have the power to calm one of the two, but not at once. With emotions being a big trait of theirs, we can deduce that the Eon siblings, Latias and Latios, are related to Mesprit in some capacity. The two are highly intelligent and capable of understanding human speech. They are highly sensitive to the emotions of people and can sense them via telepathy. Latios can also turn invisible, while Latios can fly faster than a jet by tucking in its arms. Upon Mega Evolving, both can reach speeds of Mach 4. Now going back over to Dialga, it is highly possible that it has a relation to the time travel Pokemon Celebi, if its category name wasn't obvious. Celebi serves as the guardian of Johto's Ilex Forest, always wandering across time and is said only to appear in peaceful times. When it disappears into the forest, it's said to leave behind an egg it brought over from the future, and grass and trees flourish in these forests it appears in. It's thought that as long as Celebi appears, a bright and shining future awaits. Now, a huge slew of legendary Pokemon come from space and can thus be likely traced back to Palkia. The first and most significant of these is the sky-high Pokemon Rayquaza. Rayquaza has lived for hundreds of millions of years in the ozone layer, feeding on the likes of water particles and meteoroids. Every time Kyogre and Groudon have clashed, it has come down and calmed them. It's also able to Mega Evolve and doesn't need to hold a Mega Stone in order to do so. In Hoenn, Rayquaza is seen as a savior by the Draconid people, having performed the world's first Mega Evolution to save the region from Kyogre and Groudon's fighting, and they built the Sky Pillar in its honor. The second most significant Pokemon of this group is the gigantic Pokemon Eternatus. Eternatus came from an asteroid that landed in the Galar region around 20,000 years ago, resulting in the Darkest Day, during which massive amounts of the Dynamax energy it released caused many Pokemon to Dynamax and rampage out of control. The Darkest Day was stopped when Eternatus was defeated by Zacian, Zamazenta, and the two ancient Galarian kings. Its defeat resulted in its power, known as Galar Particles, to leak out, which are what caused the Dynamax and Gigantamax phenomenon to occur in present day. During the events of Sword and Shield, Chairman Rose reawakens Eternatus and creates a second Darkest Day, causing it to turn into its Eternamax form. In this form, it's absorbed all of Galar's energy, making it go into power overload, releasing infinite amount of energy and warping the space-time around it. It was only able to be stopped by Zacian and Zamazenta, just like all those years ago. Our next mythical Pokemon in this tree is the DNA Pokemon Deoxys. Deoxys was formed by the mutation of a virus and came from outer space inside a meteor. It's highly intelligent, with its brain being the object in its chest, out of which it can shoot lasers. Other than its normal form, it also has attack, defense, and speed forms, which it can transform between when exposed to special meteors. Making our way to yet another mythical Pokemon, we have the wish Pokemon Jirachi. A legend states that any wish written on the notes on its head will come true. It will only wake for 1 week every 1,000 years by the singing of a pure voice. When asleep, it's enveloped in a tight crystalline shell and has the ability to fight even without awaking. And also of note is a marking on its belly, which when it's opened contains a third eye. From the stars to the moon. Next we have the lunar Pokemon Cresselia, representing the crescent moon and the maiden that created the Milky Way. Cresselia dispels nightmares, and those who sleep holding its feather are guaranteed to have happy dreams. But on the opposite end, and completing the section of the tree, is the pitch black Pokemon Darkrai. Active during nights of the new moon, Darkrai has the power to lull people to sleep and make them dream, giving them nightmares. That said, this is not done with malicious intent, as it's merely a defense mechanism used to dispel people and Pokemon invading its territory. The nightmares caused by it can be stopped by giving the individual afflicted with them a lunar feather from Cresselia. Okay, so let's start off a new section of the family tree with the sea Pokemon Kyogre. Kyogre is not only believed to be the personification of the ocean, but the creator of the ocean itself. It also controls the water and expanded the seas, and can cause torrential downpours. It has the ability to go through primal reversion and change into what is said to be its true and original form. Whenever it encounters Groudon, the two clash in a battle for supremacy, just to always be calmed by Rayquaza. Because of its deep sea connections, the diving Pokemon Lugia likely has a direct correlation to Kyogre. Lugia is an extremely powerful controller of storms. If it flaps its wings, it can cause a storm that lasts for 40 days. And even simply a light flutter can blow apart houses. Because of how strong its powers are, it chooses to live in the deep sea trenches. And Lugia is the leader of our next Pokemon, the legendary birds Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres. Articuno has the ability to control ice, creating blizzards by freezing moisture in the air. Zapdos has the ability to control electricity, creating lightning by flapping its wings. And Moltres has the ability to control fire, creating flames when flapping its wings. The three also have forms in the Galar region. Whether they're separate from their Cantonian counterparts or they simply take these forms when they enter Galar is unknown. Regardless, they show up in the Crown Tundra every few decades to come eat fruits at the Dinah tree. Articuno gains psychic powers to keep itself airborne and fire beams to freeze enemies solid. Zapdos has become nearly flightless, able to run at speeds of over 180 miles per hour, and perform kicks able to destroy dump trucks. And Moltres has become sinister in nature, letting out flame-like aura that can consume the spirit of any creature unlucky enough to be on the receiving end of it, leaving them as burned-out shadows of themselves. With strong weather being a part of Kyogre's nature, it can be deduced that the forces of nature, Tornadus, Thundurus, Landorus, and Enamorus, are connected to it. Tornadus and Thundurus create windstorms and thunderstorms, respectively, which are able to blow away houses and create forest fires. Landorus is able to calm the two and fix the damage they cause by helping crops grow, giving it the nickname the Guardian of the Fields. In a similar vein, Enamorus signals the rise of spring whenever it appears, giving it the nicknames the Herald of Spring and God of Spring. Its love was said to give rise to fresh life. All four forces of natures have vastly different looking Therian forms, which are thought to be their true forms. With its connection to spring, the gratitude Pokemon Shaman has a possible correlation to Enamorus. Upon winter's end and people giving thanks, Shaman appears and covers the land with flowers, and the flowers all over its body bloom when it's hugged. It delivers gratitude and is able to dissolve toxins in the air, making a once polluted land become covered with flowers. When exposed to the Gracidia flower, it turns into its sky form and gains the power of flight. Strong feelings are also a big part of the Melody Pokemon, Meloetta, and the Victory Pokemon, Victini. The melodies that Meloetta sings are able to control the feelings of people and Pokemon that hear them, and have inspired many famous songs. When it uses the move Relic Song, it can transform between its aria and pirouette forms at will. Meanwhile, Victini shares the unlimited amount of energy it creates upon touching someone, making their body overflow with power. It's said that a trainer with a Victini will always win. With 80% of the Seafaring Pokemon Manaphy's body being made of water, it's almost definitely a creation of Kyogre. Manaphy was born on the cold seafloor and possesses the unique ability to bond with any Pokemon. It swims a long distance to return to where it was born and has the nickname Prince of the Sea. Manaphy is also able to lay eggs that hatch into the Sea Drifter Pokemon, Thione, although the relationship between the two is still unknown. And to be honest, not much is known about Thione in general, other than the fact that it drifts via a flotation sac on its head in packs, and like Manaphy, also returns to where it was born. And that ends that portion of the tree. Starting off this next section is the continent Pokemon Groudon. Groudon is the polar opposite of Kyogre, where it's said to be the personification of the land and the creator of the world's continents. It creates intense droughts that can evaporate water and cause volcanic eruptions, which, when summoned, can create land. And just like Kyogre, it's able to go through primal reversion and change into its true and original form. And the two have fought whenever they've encountered each other, just to be quelled by Rayquaza. But up next is the other legendary associated with continents, the colossal Pokemon Regigigas. A legend states that Regigigas towed the continents with ropes and can form whole other Pokemon in its own image using inanimate objects. It was later deemed too powerful, so it was sealed away in the basement of the Snow Point Temple. And that brings us to the very Pokemon Regigigas created. The legendary giants, Regirock, Regice, Registeel, Regieleki, and Regidrago. Regirock's body is composed entirely of rocks, and if any part of it is chipped off in battle, it seeks out other rocks to repair itself. Regice is made of ice from an ice age, cloaking itself with air as cold as -328 degrees Fahrenheit. It cannot be melted, not even with magma, and anything that just so much as goes near it will freeze. Registeel has a completely hollow body harder than any metal and can't be scratched. Regieleki was created using pure electric energy and is powerful enough to generate all of Galar's electricity if its full power were to be unleashed by removing the rings on its body. Regidrago was created using crystallized dragon energy, and only a head remains because Regigigas ran out of crystals before it could be fully completed, which, let's be honest, is a real bummer for Regidrago. But it is said to be powerful enough to contain the power of every dragon-type Pokemon. All 5 of these Pokemon were sealed away in ancient times, like their creator, possibly because they were also deemed too powerful. Now, one of 2 other legendary Pokemon that have a connection to the ground is the Terra Pokemon, Terrapicos. Inhabiting the Paldea region in ancient times, it was thought to have gone extinct due to seismic shifts about 2 million years ago. However, it survived by changing the energy in its body into hard crystals and going into hibernation deep in Area Zero. It was discovered by Heath of the Area Zero Expedition Survey team and coined its name. It's actually responsible for Paldea's terrestrial phenomenon. It is capable of bringing people and Pokemon from other timelines to its world, and its terrestrial energy can power up AI-powered machines. When either in danger or in battle, it turns into its terrestrial form, where it gains a sturdy shell made of crystals it produces. Due to its colors and shape, it was known as the Indigo Disc. And meanwhile, it takes on its stellar form when it's at full power, and goes on energy overload, which risks causing havoc on Paldea's entire ecosystem. Also having a connection to the ground is a Carbink that underwent a mutation to turn into the jewel Pokemon Diancie. By compressing the carbon in the air between its hands, it can create many diamonds, and its glimmering body is said to be one of the loveliest sights in the world. It's also capable of Mega Evolution, where it was known as the Royal Pink Princess due to its appearance. In this form, it can create a sword out of diamonds in battle, and can now shine so brilliantly that one cannot look at it when it reflects light. Going over to the volcanoes, the Lava Dome Pokemon Heatran is up next. Heatran was born from the magma within Mount Coronet, and lives in volcanic caves using its feet to crawl on ceilings and walls. Its body is made of rugged steel, and its blood boils like magma. Its own heat was enough to partially melt spots on its body as well. With a name like the steam Pokemon Volcanions, you couldn't get more blunt as to where it came from. Volcanion has a special organ that allows it to instantly vaporize the water it absorbs and let out powerful steam from the arms on its back. And the steam has enough power to blow away a mountain. You might be surprised to learn that our final Pokemon in this section, the Thunderclap Pokemon, Zeraora, also came from a volcano. Specifically, it was born from an explosion caused by a lightning bolt striking an erupting volcano. It runs at lightning speed, tearing opponents apart with its claws that emanate high voltage electricity. Even if its opponents dodge its attacks, they still get electrocuted by the sparks that fly out. Okay, starting the next part of the tree is the rainbow Pokemon Ho-Oh. Considered the guardian of the skies and possessing the power to resurrect the dead, Ho-Oh continuously flies the world's skies as a rainbow forms behind it. Its rainbow-colored feathers are taught to bring joy and happiness to those that see it. It used to perch on the bell tower in the Johto region until the brass tower burned down. Which leads us into our next trio, the Legendary Beasts. Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. They were initially 3 different Pokemon that resided in the Brass Tower and died when it burnt down. A popular fan theory states that these original beasts were Jolteon, Flareon, and Vaporeon. In any case, the 3 were resurrected by Ho-Oh to become what are now Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. Raikou represents the lightning strike that ignited the fire that burned the Brass Tower down. It runs around the land emitting roars that sound like crashing thunder. Entei represents the flames that burned down the tower. It embodies magma, and a volcano erupts every time that it roars. And Suicune represents the rain that put out the flames of the burning tower. The north winds will blow whenever it appears, and it has the ability to purify polluted water. 3 Paradox Pokemon, Raging Bolt, Gouging Fire, and Walking Wake, are thought to either be ancient relatives of the beasts, or versions of them from a different timeline. Moving on over to Unova, we have that region's main legendaries, the Tao Trio, Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem. Reshiram and Zekrom were said to be a single powerful dragon used by 2 brothers to create Unova. However, the older brother sought for truth and the younger for ideals. They began to argue and fight over who was right, and in response, the dragons split into 2, Reshiram siding with truth and Zekrom for ideals. The 2 battled, but neither could defeat each other, resulting in the brothers to set aside their differences and came to terms that neither side was right. Years later, the sons of the brothers continued the fight, resulting in Reshiram and Zekrom destroying the region with fire and lightning. The 2 can transform into the light and dark stones respectively if their bodies get destroyed. Kyurem is a dragon whose body is frozen and can form ultra cold air. A legend states that when the original dragon split, the leftovers became Kyurem. It waits for a hero to fill in the missing parts of its body with truth or ideals. This came to be completed by fusing it with Reshiram or Zekrom to become White Kyurem or Black Kyurem. Next are the final legendaries from Unova, the Swords of Justice, Cobalion, Terrakion, Virizion, and Keldeo. With a heart and body of steel, Cobalion punished people that hurt Pokemon, and can even control an unruly Pokemon with its stare. Terrakion has enough power to break through a castle wall with a single blow, which it used to protect Pokemon. And Virizion's head has horns as sharp as blades to cut opponents with whirlwind-like movements. And like the other members of its trio, it also fought against humans to protect Pokemon. One of these Pokemon they protected was Keldeo, who was separated from its parents in a fire caused by a war among people. They acted as surrogate parents and taught it everything it knew in order to survive in battle. Eventually, it grew up and surpassed its surrogates in power, and took off into the forest one day without anyone knowing why. The 4 eventually met up again, and they taught Keldeo Secret Sword. And one more thing to note is that there are Paradox Pokemon known as Ice Crown, Iron Boulder, and Iron Leaves, which are thought to be either descendants of Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion, or different versions of them from a different timeline. Making our way to Kalos, we have the region's main legendaries, the Aura Trio, Xerneas, Yveltal, and Zygarde. Xerneas can share everlasting life when its horns shine in 7 different colors, according to legend. It rescued Pokemon during an ancient war and later slept for 1,000 years as a tree before being revived. On the opposite end of the spectrum, Yveltal absorbs the life force of every living thing when its tail feathers glow red and spread wide, ending its life cycle and turning into a cocoon. Both can transform evolution stones into Mega stones and are in charge of balancing life and death. Zygarde, meanwhile, is in charge of monitoring the ecosystem and preventing it from falling into disarray. Its form changes depending on how many of its cells it's gathered. It takes a dog-like appearance when it gathers 10% of its cells, a snake-like appearance when it gathers 50%, and when it gathers all its cells, it becomes a gigantic titan that it unleashes to destroy anything that threatens the ecosystem. Next, we have the Nebula Pokemon Cosmog. Known as the Child of the Stars by the people of Alola, Cosmog's name was coined by a professor at the Aether Foundation. It came from another world and is theorized to be an Ultra Beast. It has a very trusting nature and becomes attached to whoever shows kindness to it. This can be a bad thing for it, as some bad actors have used it to their advantage, to exploit its powers to open ultra wormholes. Cosmog shares the rare distinction of being one of the few legendaries to be capable of evolution, and its first stage is the Protostar Pokemon, Cosmoem. Upon evolution, Cosmoem becomes motionless, staying in a cocoon-like shell harder than any known material. It doesn't eat, instead opting to absorb starlight and dust in the air to build energy in its core and prepare for evolution. Which brings us to the two Pokemon it's able to evolve into: the Sun Pokemon, Solgaleo, and the Moon Pokemon, Lunala. Solgaleo was once known as the beast that devours the sun, able to light up the world with the intense light it emanates from its body. Lunala, known as the beast that calls the moon, is able to devour light and turn the world into darkness. Both can also create Cosmog and travel through ultra space, with the residents of Ultra Megalopolis using them as ride Pokemon. And connecting the duo is the Prism Pokemon Necrozma. Hailing from Ultra Space, Necrozma once gained the ability to give light, but lost the ability after ancestors of the Ultra Recon Squad injured it in an attempt to steal its light. This light is the aura that surrounds a trainer and Pokemon performing a Z-move, and the area that surrounds a totem Pokemon. Being in an incomplete state, Necrozma is in constant pain and searches for light to turn back into its original form. Because Solgaleo and Lunala are composed entirely of light, they are frequently hunted down by it, and confused into either one of them to become its Duskmane or Dawn Wings form. If it collects enough light and Z-power, Necrozma turns back into its original true form, Ultra Necrozma, a massive dragon made entirely of pure light energy. But let's move to the Alola region's other major legendaries. We have the Guardian deities, Tapu Koko, Tapu Lele, Tapu Bulu, and Tapu Fini. The four Tapus are referred to as the Guardian deities because they are the protectors of Alola's four islands. Tapu Koko protects Malimali Island, Lele Akala Island, Bulu Ula Ula Island, and Fini Pawnee Island. They also control electricity, scales, vegetation, and water, respectively, and are both feared and revered for their aggressiveness. Now, making our way to the Galar region, we have the hero duo, Zacian and Zamazenta. Believed to either be siblings or rivals, Zacian and Zamazenta were both feared and respected by the people of Galar, and as we discussed with Eternatus, they worked together with the region's two ancient kings to end the darkest day. The two can turn into statues and rest for years, and also cast illusions. Zacian and Zamazenta can also wield a sword and shield, respectively, when given the rusted sword and rusted shield. Next is another legendary capable of evolution, the Wushu Pokemon, Kubfu. Referred to as the secret armor of the Isle of Armor's Master Dojo, Kubfu used to help people on their travels according to historical texts. Through special breathing techniques and intense focusing, it can create fighting energy thanks to a unique organ in its body. The types of moves it masters determine the form it evolves into. And that evolution is the Wushu Pokemon, Urshifu. Urshifu's appearance, style of battling, and personality is different depending on which form it takes. Single strike style Urshifu battles without holding back, often going for a one-hit KO with its signature move, Wicked Blow. Its Gigantamax form is known as the embodiment of rage, and it's said that its shout will rid the world of evil. Rapid strike style Urshifu, on the other hand, likes to observe the opponent's attacks while dodging, later using its signature move, Surging Strikes, to overwhelm them with multiple strikes. Its Gigantamax form keeps a perfect one-legged stance while taking the lives of those that are evil with a single glare. Moving on over to the Crown Tundra, we have the King Pokemon, Calyrex. Known as the King of Bountiful Harvests, Calyrex brings yearly harvests to the Crown Tundra, and is said to have been the King of Galar in ancient times. It has the power to heal wounds, and is one of the few Pokemon to possess the ability to speak in the human language telepathically, and it can also tame its two steeds to regain its full power. And these steeds are the wild horse Pokemon Glastrier and the swift horse Pokemon Spectrier. Glastrier has great physical strengths and destructive power that it uses to forcefully take anything it wants. It emits extremely cold air generated in its body from its nose and hooves, and while it can't move particularly fast, it can freeze the ground and slide across the ice. When tamed by Calyrex, it can create cold temperatures up to -508 degrees Fahrenheit, and becomes able to run up to 7 days and 7 nights. Spectrier, on the other hand, prefers to be isolated and comes out at night. Because of this, it has poor eyesight, but its other 4 senses are very strong. When tamed by Calyrex, it becomes so fast that it can run 1,000 miles in 1 day, and can create many small wisps to steal an opponent's life force. Our next stop is Paldea, and connected to the non-legendary Cyclizar are the Paradox Pokemon, Koraidon and Miraidon. Nicknamed Winged King and Iron Serpent, they're thought to either be an ancestor and descendant, respectively, of Cyclizar, or versions of it from another dimension. They were brought over via Time Machine by Professors Seda and Turo, who coined the names of the two, and pretty much everything else about them is unknown. Onto the newest addition to the series, the Subjugation Pokemon, Pecharunt. Known as the Never-Rotting Peach, Pecharunt creates toxic Muchi, which when consumed by those that eat it fall under its complete control and draw out their darkest desires. Humans under its control have purple eyes and become surrounded by a purple aura, while doing a strange dance and possessing a limited vocabulary. According to a myth, it came from a distant land where it was adopted by an elderly couple. Pecharunt fed Binding Muchi to its new parents, bringing out their greed, and the two gave it many requests. One of these requests was to fetch them 4 masks that could be found in Kitakami. Pecharunt recruited 3 Pokemon for help in its quest, known as the Loyal Three: Ogidogi, Munkidori, and Fezandipiti. The small and weak Ogidogi went to Pecharunt wishing for strength. The slow and dim-witted Munkidori approached it wishing for cleverness, and Fezandipiti, who had short, dull feathers, turned to it wishing for beauty. Pecharunt granted their wishes, but at the same time binded them with its toxic chain. With its newfound control over them, it used the 3 to help steal the masks. The masks, which belonged to the masked Pokemon, Orgapon and its partner, Okidogi and Fezandipiti, snuck into their cavern while the 2 were away, stealing 3 of the 4 masks, with the last being protected after Orgapon's partner fended them off. Orgapon went after them, with the Loyal 3 losing their lives in battle, and Pecharunt being knocked out and sent rolling away in its shell. Orgapon would become vilified by the people of Masui Town, thinking the Loyal 3 had died protecting their village from an evil ogre, hence how the 3 got their nickname. The first in a string of mythical Pokemon that don't seem to be connected to any other Pokemon is the mischief Pokemon Hoopa. Hoopa in its confined form is a troublemaker that can use its loop to send anything to faraway places. This loop can also warp space, which is even more realized in its unbound form, which is said to be its true form. Here, it's able to bend dimensions and steal anything it wants on a much bigger scale. A legend states that it once was greedy enough to carry off an entire castle to steal the treasure located inside. Up next is the Gloom Dweller Pokemon Marshadow. Marshadow was a myth for a long time because it never appears in front of people, instead choosing to conceal itself in the shadows of others. While doing so, it copies their powers and movements, eventually becoming stronger than those it imitates. The rogue monkey Pokemon Zarude is next. It lives in dense forests, with the other Pokemon fearing it due to its very aggressive nature. The vines on its body become nutrients in the soil when they tear off, helping the plants grow. One special Zarude, called Dada, left its pack to raise a human child, donning a cloth that it used to comfort it. The last Pokemon we'll be going over before we get to our final section is the Hexnut Pokemon Melton. Melton melts particles of iron and other metals, using them to form its body of molten steel, and it also eats those metals. Melton live as a group, and eventually one that is strong enough will absorb all the others and evolve into the Hexnut Pokemon Melmetal. Melmetal came back to life after being dormant for 3,000 years and was worshipped in ancient times for being able to create iron from nothing. Its body has hardened due to evolution, but it's still in a liquid state and has flexibility, especially in its arms, which are said to deliver the strongest punches of all Pokemon. At the end of its lifespan, it will fall apart and rust, becoming reborn as Melton. Melmetal also has a Gigantamax form, which can send out electric beams that can vaporize an opponent in one shot. Now, finally, we've decided to dedicate the last part of the family tree to the legendaries that were created by humans. The first of these are the Treasures of Ruin: Wo-Chien, Chien-Po, Ting-Lu, and Chi-Yu. While not entirely created by humans, the treasures that are their true forms were brought to life via the negative emotions of people in ancient times. Wo-Chien was formed via the grudge of a person punished for writing a king's evil deeds on wooden tablets that make up its shell. It drains the life force from vegetation. Chien-Po was created by the hatred of people who got killed by the sword that it holds. It can control 100 tons of fallen snow. Ting-Lu was formed via the fear poured into a vessel that makes up its antlers. It can split the earth open with massive fissures that are 160 feet deep. Lastly, the beads that make up Chi-Yu's eyes sparked many conflicts, and the envy that emanated from those conflicts created it. It controls flames that burn as hot as 5,400 degrees Fahrenheit. Making our way to the Aether Foundation, we have the synthetic Pokemon Type Null. Type Null was created as part of the Beast Killer project, a project started to create a Pokemon that can successfully defeat the Ultra Beasts. It was developed with cells from every Pokemon type, with the intention of giving it the ability to replicate Arceus, calling it the RKS system. This made the Aether Foundation name it Type Full. 3 models were created, but they all rejected the RKS system and went berserk. The 3 then got reinstated by special helmets and became permanently cryogenically frozen. Because the Beast Killer project was deemed a failure, Type Full was given its current name. Gladion later freed one of the Type Null and befriended it, hoping to find a way to break its helmet and give it the ability to use the RKS system. He would eventually be successful, and Type Null would evolve into Type Full, which he renamed to Silvally, the synthetic Pokemon. Now with the RKS system activated, it can change its type that corresponds with the memory it's holding, just like Arceus and its plates. Staying in Alola, we have the artificial Pokemon Magearna. Magearna was built by a scientist 500 years ago, where it was gifted to a king's daughter. It donned a pattern similar in coloring to a Pokeball on its body, but over time, the color deteriorated and it turned gray. It has a sphere on its chest called the Soul Heart, which is its true life form. It can understand human speech and perceive the emotions of people and other Pokemon. Our second to last legendary is the Paleozoic Pokemon Genesect. Genesect existed 300 million years ago as an apex predator. Team Plasma would later revive it from a fossil and technologically advance it in an attempt to create the strongest Pokemon. N canceled the project because he believes that Pokemon would lose their beauty if modified by science. However, one scientist kept working on it, reconstructing it, and attaching a cannon to its back. Special drives can be attached to Genesect's cannon to change the type of its signature move, Techno Blast. And finally, we thought it would only be appropriate to end on the original man-made legendary Pokemon, the genetic Pokemon Mewtwo. Mewtwo was created by altering the DNA of Mew and splicing the genes. It was held and studied in Cinnabar Island's Pokemon Mansion, where it broke free and destroyed the mansion, and fled to Cerulean Cave. Because it was only created for battling, it was not given a compassionate heart and thus only thinks about defeating its opponents. Mewtwo is also capable of Mega Evolution. Mega Mewtwo X gains the Fighting type, can run 328 feet in 2 seconds, and has a grip strength of 1 ton. Mega Mewtwo Y, on the other hand, has had its mental power boosted significantly and can smash a skyscraper with just one thought. Were Pokemon murdered to ensure that Mewtwo would have no weaknesses? Was a legendary Pokemon designed to be an allegory for the atomic bomb? Did Mega Evolution stem from Jirachi's wishes? Legendaries are oftentimes the Pokemon shrouded in the most mystery. So today we're visiting each region of the Pokemon world to explore some of the most interesting theories about legendary Pokemon. And naturally, we'll start with the region that started it all, Kanto. Ditto is a failed clone of Mew, and it really can't get as old school as this. The theory suggests that a second attempt at a Mew clone was made after Mewtwo, but ultimately failed and became the weird little blob Ditto. Now, this is backed up by the fact that they both learned the move Transform. And we also have to point out that they have similarly colored normal color schemes, plus identical shiny color schemes. They have the same weight, and they're both genderless. And on top of that, Ditto can be found in Pokemon Mansion and Cerulean Cave in the Kanto games. the former of which is home to Mewtwo's creation, and the latter is where it flew to afterwards. I guess the unfortunate part about all this is that this theory was debunked by Junichi Masuda in a 2016 interview, which is actually kind of a bummer, because all of that evidence is really compelling. Mewtwo is being created during the player's journey. This one is brought to us by none other than the Pokemon theorist legend Birdkeeper Toby, and this theory states that Mewtwo was being created by Team Rocket during the events of the Kanto games as opposed to before. As we know, they steal the Dig TM from a man in Cerulean City and search for fossils in nearby Mount Moon. The theory later says that Team Rocket used the Dig TM to dig to Cerulean Cave to search for more fossils, which is where they found the Mew fossil around the time the player picks their starter. Later, they would create Mewtwo in the abandoned Pokemon Mansion on February 6th. Notice how in the journal it doesn't say a year. That's the year the player starts their journey, with February 6th being the day. Then, all the times the player encounters Team Rocket, it serves as a distraction for the Mewtwo project. This all culminates in why Mewtwo escaped to Cerulean Cave to begin with, because that's where the Mew fossil was found. Team Rocket captured or killed Kanto's dark types to make sure that Mewtwo had little weaknesses. This rather dark theory was proposed by Reddit user CastAside1812. And it explains why no dark types are in Kanto in Generation 1. In order to make sure Mewtwo was as strong as possible, Team Rocket killed or captured all of them. Sure, there is the Ghost type, but in Gen 1, Psychic types are immune, and the Bug type moves available are crappy and are mostly on Pokemon Mewtwo could wipe away with just one attack. Dark is the only type strong against Psychic that's unavailable. Then in Gen 2, the direct sequels, you suddenly see the wild Dark types, Houndour and Murkrow in Kanto, as well as on Team Rocket admin's teams. And we gotta admit, we can't help but find that suspicious. Could Team Rocket have released them back into the wild? Who knows, but for now, let's travel on over to Johto. The legendary beasts originated from the original 3 evolutions. As we know, Ho-Oh resurrected 3 Pokemon that perished in a fire in the Burn Tower, and they became the legendary beasts Raikou, Entei, and Suicune. But as highlighted by Bonesweet on the Poke Community forums, there's a number of factors backing up that the Pokemon that died were the original 3 evolutions: Vaporeon, Jolteon, and Flareon. The first and most obvious factor is that they have the same types and similar colors. Secondly, the normal abilities of the evolutions are Water Absorb for Vaporeon, Volt Absorb for Jolteon, and Flash Fire for Flareon, the same as the hidden abilities for their corresponding beast in Gens 5 and 6. Jolteon and Raikou also both have high speed and special attack, Flareon and Entei have decent attack, and Vaporeon and Suicune are bulky. Another small, likely coincidental thing to note is that the Kimono Girls, the group of trainers that use evolutions when the player battles them, reside in Ekritik City, exactly where the Burn Tower is located. But what if the legendary beasts did not originate from the evolutions? PokeTuber Not-So-Ace Trainer brings up the argument that the 3 Pokemon that died in the Burn Tower were not the evolutions, but simply 3 Eevee. He brings up how the legendary beasts were formed through the representations of the elements of the tragic event. Raikou represents the lightning that struck the tower, Entei the flames that spread, and Suicune the rain that put it out. With this in mind, a couple of Eevee's Pokedex entries are brought up which state that it has unstable DNA and adapts to harsh environments by evolving. With such heavy amounts of electricity, fire, and water, could this be enough for these Eevee to turn into something far greater than their normal evolutions? The beasts, perhaps? Ho-Oh was originally a Fearow. YouTuber Proto Mario starts this theory off by bringing up Ho-Oh's inspiration. The phoenix, a bird in Greek mythology, came into being by rising from the ashes of a bird which died in flames. He comes to the conclusion that Ho-Oh rose up from the ashes of a Fearow and got engulfed in flames and died. This is backed up by the fact that they both have crests on their head, long beaks, and similar body structures, talons, and tail and wing feathers. But let's move on over to the home of the 3rd generation. Next up is Hoenn. The original 3 Regis represent World War II survivors. A popular theory among the Japanese fan community states that Regirock, Regice, and Registeel represent the survivors of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. First off, Hoenn is inspired by the Japanese island of Kyushu. which is where Nagasaki is located. The areas in which the Regis are found in the games appear to correlate with real locations in Kyushu. Regice in the aforementioned Nagasaki, where the first atomic bomb was dropped, Registeel in Miyazaki, and Regirock in Oita. Those other two cities were both home to important military bases that were heavily bombed by the US as well. The theory goes on to say that Relicanth and Wailord, the two Pokemon needed to catch the Regis, sort of resemble the shapes of Little Boy and Fat Man, the two atomic bombs. One of the Braille messages in the sealed chamber also makes mention of how people used to live in it, possibly meaning that it was a place to take cover during the bombings. Then in Generation 4, Regigigas' location in Snow Point Temple mirrors that of Wakanai Hokkaido, home of the Monument of Peace and the Soya Kaiko Navy War Memorial. And then to top this theory off, all three Regis know the move Explosion, the origins of the Weather Trio. Some now deleted Reddit posts brought up the theory that Kyogre, Groudon, and Rayquaza used to be a Wailord, Aggron, and Gyarados respectively. Their reasoning is that in Generation 3, Kyogre and Wailord were the only two Pokemon that learned the move Water Spout, and that they both have the same color scheme in both their normal and shiny forms. Meanwhile, Aggron makes its homes on mountains, and Groudon is awakened at Mount Chimney. Aggron's evolutionary line eats ore from underground, and Groudon is a ground type. Then Mega Aggron has spikes on its body, and Groudon has similar ones on its tail. And then both have 3 claws on each foot. As for the final trio member, Gyarados and Rayquaza don't have much of a difference height and weight-wise, being 21 feet 4 inches tall and 518 pounds, and 23 feet tall and 455.2 pounds, respectively. Both are part flying type, and even though Gyarados isn't a dragon, dragon-type trainers like Claire and Lance have used it on their teams. Could some strange phenomenon have happened to make these Pokemon completely become a new species? Jirachi gifted Rayquaza the power of Mega Evolution. Reddit user Flarestorm88 argues that when the Draconid people wished for Rayquaza to protect them and stop the fight between Groudon and Kyogre, Jirachi was the one who granted their wish by giving Rayquaza the ability to Mega Evolve. This is backed up by some of Jirachi's Pokedex entries stating that it will grant any wish for just 1 week every 1,000 years. And, well, Kyogre and Groudon fight every 1,000 years, and Jirachi grants wishes, so there you go. Deoxys and Pokerus are connected. Poketuber's hybrid hero and Azimitsu bring up that Deoxys was formed from the mutation of the DNA of a space virus, according to several of its Pokedex entries. Then you have Pokerus, a rare virus that if a Pokemon is infected with it, gains double the EVs upon defeating an opponent. It's argued that when the meteor containing the space virus fell to Earth, part of it could have escaped and become Pokerus. The similarities don't end there though, as both Deoxys and Pokerus have an emphasis on stats. Pokerus has the EV doubling as previously stated, while Deoxys has its various forms that boost one of its stats. Also, when a Pokemon is infected with Pokerus, it gains a purple icon to indicate so, and Deoxys has a purple core. Additionally, Deoxys' regular colors are red and blue, which make purple, and its shiny is yellow, the same color as the symbol indicating a Pokemon is cured of Pokerus. But let's move on to the most lore-focused region yet. Sinnoh is bound to have some good theories. The Lake Guardians are connected to Unova's Tao Trio. Ancient Skull Kid on Tumblr proposes the idea that once the original dragons split into Reshiram, Zekrom, and Kyurem, the Lake Guardians, Uxie, Mesprit, and Azelf, helped influence them. Uxie represents knowledge, and as a result may have helped Reshiram become the Legendary of Truth because the two are similar in theory. Mesprit, which represents emotion, could have helped Zekrom become the Legendary of Ideals because people form ideals from their feelings. Azelf, meanwhile, represents willpower, thus potentially helping Kyurem find a balance between truth and ideals, since truth is based on will. And as a bonus theory, the theorist also proposes that the Lake Guardians are connected to Unknown. Uxie is connected to the letters, which are used to communicate knowledge, Azelf to the question mark, which is used to ask questions for something you want, and Mesprit the exclamation point, which is used to express strong emotions. Giratina was meant to calm Dialga and Palkia. A theory circulating on Reddit brings up how Giratina was banished to the Distortion World by Arceus for its violent actions, but notes that it's often kind, calm, and acts as a protector. Redditor Lochi01 proposes that Giratina was originally created to serve a similar purpose as Rayquaza, to calm Dialga and Palkia if a harsh battle between them broke out. But what were these acts of violence that caused it to get banished? Dialga and Palkia might have had a fight so violent one day that Giratina believed it would be better to kill them both to prevent further destruction. This banishment then caused Arceus to give the role of controlling Dialga and Palkia to the Lake Guardians, who would do so using the Red Chain. And since Giratina is capable of leaving the Distortion World and has stopped the duo from getting harmed, such as when it stopped Cyrus in Pokemon Platinum, perhaps it had since learned how important the duo's roles are in the Pokemon world. Why Regigigas created the Regis? Gabrielle Duenes on Reddit came up with the theory that when people witnessed Regigigas towing the continents and seeing its sheer power, they started to worship it and see it as a protector. Regigigas, however, couldn't take on the task of becoming a guardian because pushing the continents around made it so tired, which is honestly pretty understandable. So to make the people happy, it created Regirock, Regice, and Registeel, so they would feel safe and it would leave to find a place to rest. The theorist then explains that as Regigigas went to rest, it suddenly heard that the original dragon, which was in Galar, split and flew to Unova. It then traveled to Galar, fearing that things would go out of balance, and using flesh from the original dragon, created Regidrago, but could only finish its head. It also created Regieleki from the original dragon's plasma, but before it could give it a vessel, it became weaker and fainted, causing its creations to wreak havoc throughout the Pokemon world. The people then started to fear Regigigas, misunderstanding what it was trying to do, and sealed it away along with the other Regis. Finally, being that weak for so long gave it the ability Slow Start. But now it's time to travel outside Japan for the first time. As we enter Unova, the Swords of Justice are originally from Kalos. As we know, there are some aspects of Pokemon that mirror the real world. Reddit user 69Kuda highlights how Kalos is based on France and Unova is based on the US. And with the Swords of Justice, Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion being based on the Three Musketeers. A French story, could they originally be from Kalos? But if that's the case, how did they end up in Unova? The theorist highlights that the lore states that there was a war in Unova in which humans started a forest fire. The Swords of Justice swept in and saved as many Pokemon as they could and went into hiding afterwards. Their theory is that this war mirrors the real-life French and Indian War, a battle which ended in the French ceding some of their territory in America to the British. In the Pokemon version, as Kalos colonized Unova, they brought the Swords of Justice with them, and when the war ended, the trio simply remained in Unova after going into hiding. The original dragon represents dreams. This theory lays out what we know about the Tao Trio. Reshiram represents truth, Zekrom represents ideals, and Kyurem represents emptiness. Additionally, in black, the old is rejected in favor of the new, and vice versa in white. And part of Kyurem's name comes from the word nothing. Theorists then go on to say that dreams play a significant part in Gen 5 with elements like the Dream World and Dream Radar. With all that in mind, the original dragon must represent something that self-contradicts itself. Zekrom and Reshiram need the aura of a human to come back to life, and dreams can be unachievable, meaning it's the only time truth and ideals can coexist. So with that said, the original dragon represents dreams, or ambitions. Victini represents an atomic bomb. Some theorists have pointed out how Victini's name comes from the words tiny and victory, and how its Pokedex entry says it creates limitless energy in its body and releases it. That limitless energy might be a reference to an atomic bomb's power, and Victini's fire typing might reference the aftermath of the bomb being dropped. As we discussed in the Reggie theory in the Hoenn section, the US dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Japan, and one was called Little Boy. Well, Unova is based on the US, and Victini is quite a little boy. Victini also makes the V victory sign with its hands, which people used after World War II when the enemy was defeated. Also, the move V-Create is a V on fire, somewhat resembling an arrow pointing down, and Victini's ability Victory Star increases accuracy. But let's move on to the first European-inspired regions. Next up is Kalos. Yveltal isn't evil. Now, you're probably all thinking, Yveltal is the destruction Pokemon, and evil is literally part of its name. But Reddit user Kakyoan Crusader doesn't exactly agree with the common sentiment. They refer to the movie Deontay and the Cocoon of Destruction, where Yveltal got disturbed from its sleep in its cocoon, and that's what caused it to destroy everything in its path. Now, we all know the anime's canon is completely separate from the game's canon, but this still stands. The theorist then argues that Yveltal didn't choose its power of destruction itself, but was born with it, thus making it a curse. Basically, it doesn't want to kill, but it has to because of what it was born with. Putting more salt in the wound is that it was alone in its cocoon its entire life, making it blind because it's so dark. Carbink transforms into Deontay when under pressure. You ever wonder why Carbink doesn't evolve into Deontay? After all, the two are nearly identical. Reddit user Blue Boy Smash has a theory as to what the relationship between the two actually are. Deontay's Pokédex entry states that it is a sudden mutation of Carbink, so because of that, this theorist turned to the power of geology. They say that diamonds in real life are rocks that form under the compression of carbon atoms, and Carbink's diamonds are blue. And this correlation happens when diamonds are infused with boron during formation. Deontay, however, has pink diamonds, and this coloration occurs when it's exposed to extreme heat and pressure after being formed. So with all this in mind, Carbink possibly transforms into Deontay when it's exposed to an extremely painful source of stress, such as if it's being crushed. Hoopa is saving legendaries from certain destruction. I Am From Mars AMA on Reddit brings up how in Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, Pokemon, including legendaries from other regions, can be found in mirage spots and how Hoopa is the one responsible. However, Hoopa isn't transporting them to Hoenn out of malice, but to protect their regions from being destroyed by an incoming meteoroid. In the Delta episode, Zinnia explains how there is a second Hoenn region and it would be destroyed by the meteoroid since Mega Evolution doesn't exist in it, as Mega Rayquaza is the only one capable of stopping it. The theory also suggests that since the legendaries use the original versions of the battle themes from their respective games, Hoopa must have transported them from their home region, thus circling this theory back to its original point. But it's time for some tropical breezes and fun in the sun because Alola is up next. The 18th Memory. As pointed out by Spider Manectric on Reddit, the Aether Foundation's original Type Null project was called Type Full, as a means to recreate Arceus and its ability to change its type via its various plates. On the deleted Type Full files reads, "Dummy test of the RKS system program has been completed. Type has been successfully altered with all 18 special memories. The transplantation of the RKS system program to the models is underway. The BK's official name has been set as Type Full." Notice how 18 memories are mentioned when in-game there are only 17 for all except normal. Well, this suggests that there is an 18th normal type memory out there, waiting to be discovered for Silvally to use. How Lily carries Cosmoem in her bag. When playing through the Gen 7 games, we probably all asked ourselves, how can Lily be carrying Cosmoem in that bag and not come crashing down? After all, it's tied for the heaviest Pokemon at 2,204.4 pounds. PokeTuber Gator EX brings up how the floating Cosmoem may be able to sense Lily's movements and keep itself in the middle of her bag at all times so as to not bring her down. However, it's essentially a cocoon and can barely move, so this could just be another case of Pokemon sizes meaning nothing. Like, how else do you explain Wailord shrinking down when sending it out to battle? Okay, that last theory wasn't the best, so let's end Alola off with something with substance. Magearna and Spiritomb are connected. Gaffacakes from Reddit makes the connection that both Magearna and Spiritomb are made from souls. Magearna with its soul heart and Spiritomb from its 108 souls. They also bring up that the souls that make up Spiritomb were bound to the odd keystone 500 years ago, as was the creation of Magearna. Spiritomb has more connections to the number 108, those being that both its defensive stats are 108, its weight 108 kilograms, and its Sinnoh Pokedex number is 108. On the other hand, Magearna's Pokedex number is 801, the exact reverse of 108. With that said, this theorist suggests that either Spiritomb inspired the creation of Magearna, or Magearna's creator collected some of Spiritomb's soul energy to create the Soul Heart. But moving on to our second to last region, the 8th generation Galar. Zacian and Zamazenta's origins. Nuigi12 on Reddit brings up how Zacian's sword is named the Fairy King Sword, but who was the Fairy King exactly? While not being a fairy type, Calyrex is very fairy-like and of course is a king, so this theorist proposes that Calyrex was the one that gave Zacian its sword. Zamazenta, meanwhile, is referred to as the Flying Master's shield. So what if Urshifu was the fighting master that trained it? After all, Urshifu is a very talented fighter that can master two different fighting styles, and Behemoth Bash's move animation features Zamazenta rushing forward, much like Single Strike Urshifu's Wicked Blow. Eternatus is linked to Ultra Beasts. Proposed by Redditor Alcoholic Socks, this theory brings up that much like the Ultra Beasts, Eternatus does not come from the Pokemon world as it came from a meteorite. Next, the Dynamax phenomenon in Galar came about after it was defeated by Zacian and Zamazenta, causing its energy to leak out. This next part of the theory then takes us to Alola, where we take a look at totem Pokemon, which became larger than other Pokemon of their species after being exposed to energy from Ultra Wormholes. So with both Dynamax and Ultra Wormhole energy able to make Pokemon bigger, Eternatus can easily be connected somehow, especially when you take in the fact that Necrozma and Cosmog, two other Pokemon that aren't Ultra Beasts, have links to Ultra Wormholes too. Glastrier and Spectrier were one Pokemon. This theory reminds us of how in the Crown Tundra, the player has to pick between Glastrier or Spectrier to become Calyrex's steed. But what if the two horses were once one Pokemon? The theory states that Calyrex came and tamed this Pokemon and started using it as its steed. Then when the Crown Tundra froze again, Calyrex weakened and had to leave the horse behind. Not being able to fend for itself, the horse eventually died, with Glastrier forming from the remnants of its frozen body, and Spectrier forming from its spirit. But let's move on over to our final region, and talk about Paldea. Miss Rayford has evil intentions. This theory is only partially related to legendaries, but still interesting nonetheless. This one suggests that Miss Rayford, the history professor at the academy that sends the player on their quest to catch the treasures of ruin, actually has sinister intentions or was a scrapped antagonist. Backing this up is that she gives the player the nasty plot TM when they catch the treasures of ruin, as well as her dialogue, saying that she wanted to search for them on her own, but was only successful in getting them because she sent the player, someone with a pure heart. Terapagos brings dreams into reality. Another theory that went pretty viral was that Paradox Pokemon come from dreams as opposed to the past or future, and Terapagos is the one bringing them into reality. What backs this up is a frame from Gen 5's Dream World, which has a cloud-framed scene exactly like the starting screen of Scarlet and Violet. This brings us to the conclusion that the Paradox Pokemon are brought into the real world from the Dream World. Further backing this up is the fact that it has also been shown to project into the past by connecting the dreams of both Pokemon and people. Whether you believe this theory or not, I think we can agree with that one Redditor who's just happy seeing Hydreigon happy near the rainbow. The player's Koraidon/Miraidon is Heath Cyclizar. Rounding things out is Redditor Terosikin's theory, that continues from a previous one of theirs, which states that Paradox Pokemon come from an alternate timeline, and are simply regular Pokemon that are exposed to mysterious scales, and come to our timeline through Seda/Turo's time machine. With that said, Heath Cyclizar could have been one of those Pokemon that transformed into the Koraidon/Miraidon used by the player. This is backed up by the fact that the player's dragon is friendly, unlike the one that killed the professor, is the only one that is rideable, doesn't fight until the end of the game, and its Terra type is locked to Dragon, just like a regular Cyclizar.
Ever since 1996, the Pokemon series has had a huge cast of legendary and mythical Pokemon. From being proudly displayed on the box to being the focal point of a major motion picture, legendary Pokemon and their surrounding lore have been deeply connected to the heart of adventure and discovery that make the series special. The games have cataloged so many of these titans, it can almost be impossible to keep track of them all. But which of these legends and myths have the world's best interests at heart, or simply want to rule it for themselves? Let's find out. I'm Kifinosi with PokéBinge, and this is Legendary Pokemon, Good to Evil. For this video, we'll be including both legendary and mythical Pokemon, trying to focus mostly on their lore and their representation in the games. We'll take into account their anime and movie adaptations only if the games don't give us a good glimpse into their personalities and their desires. We'll also be ignoring the Ultra Beasts, as while they are rare Pokemon, they are common in their home dimension in Ultra Space. And of course, there will be spoilers, so watch at your own risk. As always, we'll start off with the most noble characters and work our way down to the most vile. These Pokemon are the good. Getting the gold medal of good is mighty Sinnoh himself, Arceus. According to legend, Arceus emerged from a mysterious egg before time itself and created the Pokemon world as we know it with its 1,000 arms. Arceus is famous for creating Dialga, Palkia, and Giratina, who govern time, space, and antimatter respectively. In Heart Gold and Soul Silver, in the Sinjo ruins, we see that Arceus is capable of actually creating more of the creation trio on a whim. In Pokemon Legends Arceus is shown to be an inherently benevolent deity, using its unfathomable power to create the noble Pokemon and shepherd humanity and Pokemon in the direction of coexistence and mutual respect. With its constant oversight of the existence of the Pokemon world and the laws that govern it, Arceus is more than deserving of the top spot. Riding in to grab the silver medal of good is Calyrex, the king of bountiful harvests. Calyrex is a merciful and honorable Pokemon who led the Galar region in ancient times. Using its powers of healing and plant growth, this Pokemon would usher in enormous harvests, earning its title as the king of bountiful harvests. When battling, Calyrex would even heal its opponent's wounds after battle, just because it's that honorable of a combatant. At full power, Calyrex also possesses the ability to see into the past and future and, according to legend, use this ability to save an entire forest of Pokemon from a meteor. Now, Calyrex did this by thinking of the idea to physically pick up the forest and literally push it somewhere else. Calyrex's heroic and noble nature make it deserve the silver medal of good. Earning the bronze medal of good is the heroic duo, Zacian and Zamazenta, the warrior Pokemon. These two Galarian Pokemon are supposedly the two legendary heroes who defeated Eternatus during the Darkest Day, saving the region itself and possibly even the world. Together, these two Pokemon are able to negate Eternatus' Dynamax energy spike and allow it to be contained, and they've done this twice. Once during the original Darkest Day, and again when Chairman Rose decides he's evil now and decides to start another Darkest Day. Then they turn to stone and wait until they need to save the world again. These are easily two of the more heroic Pokemon on this list, and with their track record of saving the planet, yeah, they earn this spot. Coming in just shy of bronze is Mew, the new species Pokemon. This little fella has been a staple of the series ever since Generation 1, and is an incredibly rare Pokemon to even witness, let alone catch. Mew possesses the DNA of all Pokemon, essentially being the catalyst of Pokemon as a species in the Pokemon world. Mew is a curious and playful Pokemon, but when push comes to shove, you know they're on the side of good. In all of its many cameos across the series, Mew has been shown to be a heroic Pokemon. To name just a few instances, it fights its clone sibling Mewtwo to stop him from destroying the planet in Mewtwo Strikes Back, serving as a guardian of the Tree of Beginning in Lucario and the Mystery of Mew, and rescuing Ash and Go's Pokemon captured by Team Rocket in the episode Dreams Are Made of These. Mew's altruistic nature is a strong reason why it garners a high spot on this list. Coming next is Suicune, the Aurora Pokemon, and a standout member of the legendary dogs. Suicune is capable of walking across water, as well as being able to purify water that's contaminated by disease and filth. It travels across the land in search of waters to cleanse. In the anime, it's regularly encountered by Ash and company, fighting alongside them from time to time. Gol has even caught a Suicune very recently, putting it up there with one of the legendaries that's directly worked with the protagonists as one of their Pokemon. Suicune's presence as one of the protagonist's Pokemon, as well as its powers to purify one of the world's most important natural resources, put it up close as one of the most useful and good Pokemon on this list. Next up is the sweet little Cosmog, as well as their evolved forms, Cosmoem, Solgaleo, and Lunala. Cosmog's a genuinely sweet, curious little Pokemon. It is incredibly naive, which puts Cosmog at risk of being taken advantage of. It then evolves into Cosmoem, a motionless cocoon state, before finally transforming into either Lunala or Solgaleo. Lunala and Solgaleo were worshipped in ancient Alola as deities of the moon and sun, respectively. In the anime and the games, Cosmog and their evolutions directly work with the protagonists, being raised by Lily. This causes it to have some of the most direct cooperation with the good guys in the entirety of Pokemon, earning a rather high spot on this list for being good. However, Cosmog loses some points because it just can't get in the bag. Next is Celebi, the time travel Pokemon. This little green Time Lord is known for being the guardian of Ilex Forest in the Johto region, using its powers over the time stream in order to fix anomalous activity and promote a prosperous future. Celebi is typically depicted as a good Pokemon at heart, such as when it rescues a Zoroark from Kodai in the movie Zoroark, Master of Illusions, or when Celebi works with your team in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Explorers of Time /Darkness darkness/sky to stop Dialga and undo the bad future. Celebi's inherent protectiveness and kind personality earn her a spot pretty high up on this list. Next, we have Landorus, the guardian of the fields. While Landorus may look scary on the outside, this Pokemon's behavior tells a different story entirely. Alongside Enamorus, Landorus is an integral part of giving the Pokemon world fertile soil for crops. When its sibling Pokemon Tornadus and Thundurus, two Pokemon that both bring horrible storms, start to clash, causing untold devastation on the land, Landorus comes in to quell the conflict, sort of like an older brother breaking up its two younger brothers fighting. Landorus's protection from storms and its critical involvement in the harvest seasons make it rank rather high. Next is the melody Pokemon Meloetta. A muse for the musical arts, Meloetta is a mythical Pokemon born for the stage. Using Relic Song, its signature move, Meloetta can shift between its more music-oriented aria form and its graceful, dance-focused pirouette form. Meloetta's music has inspired many famous songs, giving the Pokemon a direct connection to the culture of the Pokemon world. While it may not be the most physically helpful Pokemon of the legendaries like Landorus and Celebi, Meloetta is a Pokemon that has done nothing but contribute to one of the most important parts of human culture. It's just a good Pokemon through and through. Next is Cresselia, the lunar Pokemon. Cresselia is a Pokemon that's said to bring pleasant dreams. Cresselia possesses skill with healing and warding off nightmares, and actively opposes its nightmare counterpart, Darkrai. In Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Time, Darkness, Sky, Cresselia even serves as a teammate in the later game dungeons, as it works with the protagonist and their partner to fight Darkrai. Cresselia's role as a protector of rest puts it high up on this list. Next is the rainbow Pokemon Ho-Oh. Ho-Oh is known for its ability to create gorgeous rainbows as it flies overhead. Ho-Oh's appearance is said to invoke eternal happiness, and it's had a hand in creating the three legendary dogs, Entei, Raikou, and Suicune. Ho-Oh is worshipped in the Johto region as a guardian of the skies and a symbol of rebirth, rumored to have the ability to resurrect the dead. These supposed powers of rebirth have even caused a religious movement centered around them to form within Ecruteak City. Ho-Oh's positive connotations and impact in Johto's culture is what puts it a little closer to the top of the good side in this list. Funnily enough, next up is Lugia, the complement to Ho-Oh, the guardian of the seas and the leader of the legendary birds. Lugia isolates itself far off in the middle of the ocean due to its volatile storm powers. Lugia can cause tornadoes and hurricanes that last for weeks with just a little twitch of its wings. While it may be a very solitary Pokemon, Lugia serves the important role of breaking up Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres when they squabble over territory, preventing tiny disputes from spilling out into highly volatile brawls, such as what happened in the movie The Power of One. Lugia's place here purely for the fact that it serves as a mediator between the legendary birds, as well as seemingly having the forethought to protect others from powers it just can't control. Next up is Victini, the victory Pokemon. This little ball of energy is said to bring victory to any that own it, carrying nearly an infinite amount of energy it can spread through a touch. Victini is a Pokemon that literally radiates positivity and does nothing but try to help the trainer it partners with. Victini simply exists to give energy to others, and that's ultimately a good thing for anyone. Everyone needs a little pep in their step. Up next is Shaman, the gratitude Pokemon. Shaman has two forms, its land form and its sky form. In land form, Shaman is incredibly shy and fearful of others, while in sky form, which it transforms into by touching a Grassidea flower, it's open and playful. Shaman flock to places with large amounts of gratitude, which causes the flowers on its body to bloom. It can use these flowers to dissolve pollution in the air, causing new flowers to bloom. Shaman's a very feel-good Pokemon, and poetically repays others' gratitude and kindness with the beauty of nature, putting it up solidly in the good portion of our list. Magearna, the artificial Pokemon, is next on the list. Despite clearly being a robot, Magearna is far from unemotional. Magearna's sphere in the center of its chest is known as its soul heart, a condensed ball of life energy taken from other Pokemon. The soul heart is the very culmination of Magearna's being, connecting it directly to other Pokemon and allowing it to feel their emotions, thoughts, and desires. This heightened empathy also has the unfortunate side effect of making it feel the pain of others, making it try as hard as it can to help other Pokemon, if not just to protect Magearna itself. Magearna's empathy puts it alongside the neutrally good Pokemon on this list. Next up is the sky-high Pokemon, Rayquaza. High up in the ozone layer sleeps this legendary beast, resting and feeding off of water and other particles at high altitudes. Rayquaza also eats meteoroids in the stratosphere, using them to fuel its mega stone-like organ in its body, giving it the ability to mega evolve without a physical stone. Rayquaza serves multiple functions in protecting the planet. It regularly destroys and consumes the meteors meteors entering the atmosphere, and serves a critical role in stopping Kyogre and Groudon from fighting and causing an end-of-the-world scenario, as seen in Pokemon Emerald. However, Rayquaza doesn't appear to be really doing these good deeds out of any goodwill on its own part, and is mostly doing these acts to ensure that it has a habitat to live in, which is more morally neutral. It also seems to have a temper, if its paranoid actions in the conclusion of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Red/Blue Rescue Team is anything to go off of, but it does do good for the world. It'll just have to rest comfortably at the outer fringes of the good category. Next up is Xerneas, the life Pokemon. This is a strange one. This stag-like Pokemon possesses the power to grant immortality to those who interact with it, and is able to free those who've been petrified by its counterpart Pokemon, Yveltal, the destruction Pokemon. There isn't much to really say about Xerneas outside of the fact that it doesn't seem to be aggressive, and its role in the cycle of life and death with Yveltal is very important for the Pokemon world's ecosystem. Without Xerneas, Pokemon would only have their life force taken away by Yveltal, which makes it strictly a force of good purely for its role as a part of this balance. However, without Yveltal, nothing will ever pass on, which can lead to all kinds of awful situations. An example of this is when Lysander tries to use Xerneas' leftover power to make everyone immortal in Pokemon X when his headquarters is crumbling on top of them. The fragile balance that needs to be struck puts Xerneas just a little more towards the neutral side of the good spectrum than other Pokemon. Slithering on in is the order Pokemon, Zygarde. Zygarde is a very weird Pokemon. Zygarde's a Pokemon that transforms depending on how complete it is. Its completed body is made up of 5 Zygarde cores and hundreds of Zygarde cells. Zygarde's cores are essentially its brains, and when the cores and cells are separate, they're helpless without being merged to form Zygarde. At 10% completion, it becomes a dog-like Pokemon that focuses on brutal close-range combat and uses a single core to control itself. At 50% completion, it takes on its more iconic Cobra-like appearance. It's in this state that Zygarde starts to actively monitor the ecosystem around it and will actively start to defend it. At 100% completion, when every cell and core is obtained and fused together, Zygarde becomes an enormous Megazord-like entity. This state only comes to be when Xerneas and Yveltal are put in danger and will actively seek out and eliminate any threats to the ecosystem. Think of 100% Zygarde as the planet's immune response, a last resort that's called upon should the concept of life and death be put into jeopardy. Zygarde's existence is not only important, but an absolute necessity for safeguarding the physical embodiments of life and death in the Pokemon universe. However, Zygarde's immense power makes controlling it a major issue, as shown by the amount of damage Zygarde's able to inflict when actively being controlled by Team Flare in the Pokemon anime. While Zygarde's existence is wholly good, its immense power and potential for destruction in the wrong hands put it in the more neutrally good category. Hailing from Galar is Cubfu, and its evolved form, Urshifu. The small Cubfu is like a typical martial arts anime protagonist, training its mind and body day and night to perfect its fighting spirit. Depending on the techniques Cubfu masters, Cubfu then evolves into either the fighting/dark single strike Urshifu or the rapid strike Urshifu. Single strike Urshifu is a ruthless combatant, focusing on defeating the opponent in a single well-placed punch. Single strike Urshifu's vicious method of battling has led to some calling the Pokemon the embodiment of rage. Rapid strike Urshifu, however, is a far more calm and patient creature, using a fighting style reliant on anticipating and avoiding enemy attacks. Rapid Strike Urshifu wears down the enemy with counterattacks. Rapid Strike Urshifu has been known to banish evil from the hearts of others with a glare. Cubfu's evolutions represent the two directions its life can go, either down the path of ruthlessness and violence, or patience and understanding. Cubfu and Urshifu's wildly changing paths and story of self-discovery and betterment cause it to remain solidly in the neutrally good category of this list. Drifting in from the deep blue is Manaphy, the Seafaring Pokemon. Manaphy is a Pokemon made up of 80% water, and on the rare occasion it is located, it's found drifting in the sea in an attempt to return to the place it was born. Manaphy is a very empathetic Pokemon, using its signature move Heart Swap to bond with other Pokemon. Because Manaphy's liquid body is sensitive to its environment and its powers focus almost exclusively on allowing it to connect to Pokemon on a heart-to-heart level, Manaphy tends to lean toward a more pacifistic type of means of managing conflict. Thus, Manaphy sticks up there with the more peaceful Pokemon on this list. Diancie, the Jewel Pokemon, rises up to take the next spot on this list. Diancie is considered to be an extremely rare evolution of Carbink and is capable of instantly creating diamonds by compressing carbon in the air between its hands. In its mega-evolved form, the Diancie is known as the Royal Pink Princess because of its elegant, noble stature. In the movie The Cocoon of Destruction, Volcanion, Diancie is shown to be in charge of overseeing and preserving the hidden diamond domain, preventing trespassers from claiming its riches. Diancie, like many other legendaries on this list, is simply trying to keep to its own devices and means no harm, landing it squarely in the neutral good spectrum. Coming up next are Latios and Latias, the Eon Duo. This duo of Pokemon is found flying at high speeds across the world, and barely anyone has ever really come in contact with them. Using their glassy feathers, they refract light in order to become invisible and prevent discovery. Latias and Latios are both highly intelligent and can actually understand human speech. Because these two Pokemon typically keep to themselves and are ultimately peaceful at heart, they bookend the neutrally good portion of our list. Dashing in next is Raikou, the Thunder Pokemon. Tending to appear from thunderstorms and when other electric types are in danger, Raikou swiftly jumps in and summons storm clouds. Raikou in both the games and the anime is shown to be incredibly distrustful of others, running at a moment's notice and even becoming hostile if approached. Because Raikou typically keeps to itself even more so than Suicune, it's overall quite a neutral Pokemon. Following Raikou is Entei, the Volcano Pokemon. When an Entei is born, a new volcano is said to appear, and when it roars, a volcano is said to erupt. Somewhere in the world, Entei is similar to Raikou and Suicune, running across the globe due to the very chaotic nature of its powers over fire. Entei ranks a little below Raikou because of its control over fire, which is a little less controllable and destructive than just electricity. Entei also has the unique position of being the main antagonist of Spell of the Unknown, even if Entei's heart was in the right place. Ultimately, Entei leans toward the more neutral spectrum. Reshiram and Zekrom are next. Reshiram is the Dragon of Truth, capable of releasing such heat from flames in its tail that it could cause climate change. According to legends, Reshiram would go to kingdoms that had ignored truth in favor of greed and burn them to the ground. Zekrom, contrasting to Reshiram, is a dragon of ideals, capable of using its mighty electrical output to create thunderstorms. Zekrom would go from town to town, destroying the kingdoms of those who had lost sight of the righteousness in their hearts. Reshiram and Zekrom have the unique position of both being incredibly powerful and incredibly esoteric in what they represent. It's hard to explain what really makes a true or ideal world in the eyes of Reshiram or Zekrom. They fight for truth and ideals, but they themselves are inherently destructive and can be manipulated toward fighting for evil causes, such as when N gets control over one of these two for Team Plasma in either Pokemon Black or Pokemon White. It's for this reason they push towards the more neutral side of our list while still representing good morals. Next, Volcanion, the Steam Pokemon, makes its home on our list. Volcanion has the power to generate steam inside of itself and expel it through the engine-like mechanisms on its back. With this power, Volcanion gains enough momentum to blast through a mountain. However, when it does this, it needs to reload using another water source. It's a Pokemon that hasn't had a lot of notable appearances in the series, but served as a deuteragonist in Volcanion and the Mechanical Marvel, portrayed as a guardian of Magearna and its soul heart. However, Volcanion possesses a resentment towards humanity for hunting Pokemon back in ancient times. This helps to insinuate that Volcanion is a Pokemon that, while it wants to keep to itself and away from humans, it ultimately protects other Pokemon. This gives it at least some leaning away from being strictly in the neutral part of our list. Next on our list are the Swords of Justice, Keldeo, Virizion, Cobalion, and Terrakion. According to Univin mythology, these four Pokemon fight to protect other Pokemon from humans who endanger Pokemon territory. This begins after witnessing two warring human armies burn down a forest they call home. From the fire, Virizion, Cobalion, and Terrakion adopt Keldeo, and together they swear that the next time humans ever threaten Pokemon, they would be there to put a stop to it. The cool and stoic Cobalion serves as the de facto leader of the group. Terrakion serves as the group's muscle and is said to have been able to destroy castle walls with its strength. The swift and graceful Virizion confounds enemies with their speed and agility. Keldeo, their youngest member, serves as the group's resolute heart and soul before leaving the group without any of them understanding why. In total, all four of the Swords of Justice have the good of all Pokemon in their hearts, but their methods lead them into heavily distrusting and becoming hostile towards humans. With the good section fully wrapped up, we now move into the straight-up neutral territory. This is the gray area. So now we have the Space and Time Pokemon, Palkia and Dialga. Palkia and Dialga were born from the mighty Arceus at the beginning of the universe, with Palkia controlling space and Dialga controlling time. Their vast amounts of power lead to them being deified in ancient Sinnoh mythology, creating the Pearl Clan, which worships Palkia, and the Diamond Clan, which worships Dialga. These two Pokemon are also integral to the very fabric of the Pokemon world's reality. As long as Dialga's heart beats, time keeps ticking. As long as Palkia breathes, space grows to be more stable. Holy, Palkia and Dialga do good purely by existing. However, it's when they fall into the wrong hands, like they very often tend to do, things get incredibly backwards. There have been several times in the anime where Dialga and Palkia have been ensnared by the red chains by the likes of Team Galactic and Alternate World Team Rocket, and are forced to change reality for the worst. Dialga has also been shown to be able to be corrupted entirely, such as in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky Darkness Time, where a bad timeline exists where Dialga went mad and caused the universe to freeze in time due to Darkrai's influence. Dialga and Palkia are good Pokemon and are important for maintaining the stability of the universe, but have powers that can be misappropriated in ways that can have terrible consequences for everyone. Next up are the legendary birds, Zapdos, Articuno, Moltres, and their 3 Galarian counterparts. Articuno has control over ice and can cause snowfall with its mere presence, and also appears to doomed travelers in the mountains. Its Galarian counterpart is a psychic type, using illusions and immobilizing psychic blasts to neutralize prey. Moltres has dominion over fire, can heal itself by roosting in a volcano, and its approach is said to foretell the coming of spring. Moltres' Galarian form is a dark type, whose flames are said to incinerate the souls of those who approach it, invoking severe fatigue. Finally, Zapdos can harness electricity and is said to appear from thunderclouds. Zapdos' Galarian form is a fighting type, who runs at a fast enough speed that it generates the sound of electricity. One of the first legendary trios in the series, the Cantonian Articuno and Moltres are said to have used their powers over ice and fire to create the oceans, while Cantonian Zapdos is said to have used its electricity to create the currents and streams. As mentioned earlier, the Cantonian birds have been known to squabble violently over each other's territory in the past and have required their leader, Lugia, to come break them up. These fights have led to massive amounts of storms and damage to the regions in which they fought. This territorialism even extends to other Pokemon, such as in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Red Rescue Team and Blue Rescue Team, where Moltres, Articuno, and Zapdos each fight the protagonists when they step into their lairs. This fervent territorialism pushes them hard against the neutral part of this list. Next up is Enamorus, known as the love-hate Pokemon. This Hisuian Pokemon is known as the Herald of Spring, and is said to appear at the end of winter to signal the beginning of springtime. Enamorus' love of life is quite literally contagious. When it appears, it's said to encourage the formation of new life in the surrounding area. However, Enamorus is not necessarily a peaceful Pokemon. When one disrespects or otherwise stalls the cycle of life, Enamorus will come down and smite that irritant personality, not unlike its vengeful sibling Pokemon, Tornadus and Thundurus. However, its role as a harbinger of springtime makes it lean toward the neutral part of this list. Rising from below is Heatran, the Lava Dome Pokemon. Heatran is a Pokemon that lives at the center of volcanic craters. According to legend, Heatran was created from magma deep inside of Mount Coronet. It's so connected to the Pokemon world's mantle that magma actually runs through its veins, and its body creates such heat that Heatran's metal exoskeleton is actually melting from the heat it gives off. This inherent heat makes it very hard to trust Heatran to reliably survive peacefully on the surface, since if it's so hot that it can melt itself, you might think that Heatran could accidentally start wildfires by walking through a forest. Heatran, though, is not an evil Pokemon and just wants to be left alone. Next on our list is Mewtwo, the genetic Pokemon. Created by Team Rocket scientists on Cinnabar Island, Mewtwo was raised to become one of the most powerful Pokemon ever created. After potentially years of experiments, Mewtwo destroys the hideout and flees. Mewtwo is one of the most elusive Pokemon, only showing itself to trainers deemed worthy. Mewtwo, according to the Pokédex, is said to not have been born with a compassionate heart. Its only concern is growing stronger and not having to answer to anyone. In Mewtwo Strikes Back, Mewtwo goes out of its way to capture and clone a bunch of trainers' Pokemon and force them to fight clones of themselves to prove who is stronger. However, the series has shown that Mewtwo is at least not unsalvageable. In Mewtwo Returns, it's shown to have become the guardian of the island where Mewtwo Strikes Back took place, protecting its fellow clones. In Genesect and The Legend Awakened, after being attacked by a bunch of Genesects, Mewtwo still offers their leader friendship. Mewtwo is a Pokemon whose harsh personality is a direct result of Team Rocket's experiments, and even though it wasn't born with a kind heart, it's shown to have at least taken steps to move past its trauma. Mewtwo is a neutral Pokemon, but not as cruel as it once was. Zipping to the next spot is Zeraora, the Thunderclap Pokemon. Zeraora's body gathers electricity from outside of itself, like a battery, which it uses to create electromagnetic fields around itself and power up its claws with high voltage electricity. These claws even generate sparks that harm the opponent should they evade the initial strike. Zeraora's speed is unmatched, being described as as moving at the speed of lightning and is said to cause thunder crashes as it moves. Zeraora is a rather brutal Pokemon, being described as tearing enemies limb from limb with its high-speed attacks. In The Power of Us, its debut movie, Zeraora develops a distrust of humans after being attacked by poachers, growing incredibly violent and dangerous to approach. But it is shown to have the potential for kindness after its faith in humanity is restored by Ash. Zeraora's electrical powers and brutal attacks make it an incredibly deadly and formidable adversary when you're on its bad side. Zeraora certainly leans toward the neutral side of this list. Rolling on in is Genesect, the Paleozoic Pokemon. Revived from a 300 million year old fossil by Team Plasma and upgraded with a powerful modifiable laser cannon, Genesect is a force to be reckoned with. Even before its transformation into what it is today, it was considered to be a formidable predator. After Team Plasma is taken over by N after the fall of Genesis, N terminates the Genesect project, him feeling Pokemon shouldn't be modified by science. But one scientist manages to continue the project in secret. In the movie Genesect and the Legend Awakened, a group of Genesect named the Genesect Army go on a rampage in New Torque City, believing the city to be their original hunting grounds and fighting Mewtwo in the process. Being incredibly territorial Pokemon, the Genesect rampage through the city before finally being talked down by Ash, Mewtwo, and company into seeing them as friends rather than enemies. Genesect is ultimately a fish out of water, outfitted with dangerous weapons it didn't used to have, and put in a situation it doesn't know how to process. It's shown to be capable of friendship and showing compassion, and because of this, it's hard to say that Genesect itself is evil. So Genesect takes a neutral stance on our list. Getting to the end of our nicer neutral Pokemon, we have Jirachi, the Wish Pokemon. Jirachi hibernates for extreme periods of time, forming a protective shell around itself and even sleep fighting if it senses it's in danger. Every 1,000 years it awakens for several days to grant any wish that's written on the notes on its head. Jirachi itself is a very kind and playful Pokemon, as seen in its debut movie, Jirachi Wishmaker. Jirachi's place on this list is derived from the fact that it doesn't have control over what people write on it, similarly to a genie. Jirachi will carry out whatever wishes are on it as long as you can meet with it while it's awake. This can certainly lead to a good-hearted person healing the sick or bringing good fortune onto others, while a person with ill intentions can use the wish in order to obtain power or abuse the wish in some way. Jirachi itself is a good Pokemon, but its massive, abusable cosmic power causes it to be considered neutral. Next is Gladion's signature Pokemon, Type Null, and its evolution, Silvally. Designed by the Aether Foundation to combat and apprehend Ultra Beasts, Type Null is a synthetic Pokemon who has cells taken from all types. Type Null possesses an RKS system that, when paired with a hard drive of a specific type of Pokemon, allows Type Null to change its type on the fly. However, Type Null and its prototypes initially reject their RKS systems, causing stress and forcing them into a frenzy, causing them to have limiter helmets put on their heads in order to quell the angering effects. Once Type Null evolves, it loses its mask and becomes Silvally, finally strong enough to use the RKS system to its full potential. Silvally is known for being staunchly loyal to its trainer, and this makes it so that its allegiance is highly dependent on the trainer who leads Silvally, making it take more of a neutral spot on this list. Next, we have Deoxys, the DNA Pokemon. Originally a regular space virus, Deoxys was exposed to a laser beam that mutated it into the dichromatic humanoid we see it as today. Deoxys is a Pokemon that shifts between its normal form, an attack form, a defense form, and a speed form, which it uses to adapt to dangerous situations. It's not entirely clear what Deoxys' motives are, as it seems to just travel through space, and only every once in a while battles Rayquaza while the latter is eating up meteors. In fact, in Pokemon Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire, the Delta episode's final battle involves Deoxys riding a meteor that was going to destroy the Hoenn region, if not the world. It's unclear whether Deoxys has a hand in causing this meteor to head towards the Pokemon world, or if it's simply hitching a ride, and because of this uncertainty, Deoxys falls into the neutral category. The true neutrals of this list are every single Reggie. Regirock, Regice, Registeel, Regieleki, Regidrago, and their leader Pokemon, Regigigas. Regigigas is said to be so strong that it towed continents. According to legend, Regigigas single-handedly created Regirock, Regice, Registeel, Regieleki, and Regidrago in its own image, and is hypothesized to have created even more. Each Regi, aside from Regigigas, who appears to be a living creature, is made of non-living materials, such as rock, ice from the Ice Age, steel, condensed electricity, or hardened draconic energy. The Regis, while all made of different materials, all seemingly share the same traits. They all lack a brain and a heart, making them a biological miracle that they even live at all. They all live solitarily, often inside of mountains or deep in ruins, and are typically only a threat if they're directly attacked. Even Regigigas spends its days slumbering in Snowpoint Temple, only reacting to outside stimuli when the slumber is disturbed. Because they keep to themselves and don't seem to live on the same wavelength as people, nor even other Pokemon, one can only rationalize rationalize that a Reggie is purely neutral at heart. They just vibe. Next up is Zarude, the rogue monkey Pokemon. Zarude are rare social Pokemon and stick together in big packs. Together, they frighten Pokemon away from their groups and will brutally assail anyone who isn't a part of their pack, showing a very territorial and aggressive side. However, some Zarude have been known to adopt human children and protect them, leaving their packs to operate solo. This is quite the case for the Zarude named Dada, a unique Zarude wearing a cloth that debuted in Secrets of the Jungle. Zarude are a group of Pokemon bent towards being territorial, but are capable of showing genuine kindness, pushing them towards the neutral side of this list. Next on our list is Marshadow, the Gloom Dweller Pokemon. One of the most secretive and cautious Pokemon on this list, Marshadow dissolves into shadows in order to keep itself hidden. It is because of this that Marshadow doesn't appear before humans, and it doesn't even appear in the Pokédex in its main series debut in the anime. Marshadow uses its powers of concealment in order to spy on others, learning their combat moves and seemingly using them better than those it sets out to copy. Marshadow also possesses the ability to understand others' feelings, giving it a heightened state of empathy compared to other Pokemon. In I Choose You, the movie Marshadow debuted in, Marshadow is shown to serve as a servant of Ho-Oh, judging those who come to meet Ho-Oh and see if they are pure of heart. However, Marshadow is temporarily turned evil after the Rainbow Wing is corrupted by Cross, turning Marshadow incredibly violent and a vector through which the Rainbow Wing could corrupt other Pokemon. During this brief stint, Marshadow and the corrupted Pokemon team up to kill Ash Ketchum. No, really, they killed him, disintegrated him. Marshadow was one of the few Pokemon in the Pokemon canon to have actually killed Ash. Even Mewtwo never got that far, having turned him to stone and technically just froze Ash. However, since this is an isolated incident and Marshadow doesn't kill anyone else, it's hard to tell whether the corrupted Rainbow Wing directly controls Marshadow or just makes it act more aggressively than it otherwise would have, seeing Ash as a threat. Because of this, Marshadow just caps the neutral tier of this list. And with our gray area wrapped up, we now get to the dark side. These legendary Pokemon are the bad and the evil. Starting the evil side of our list are Spectrier and Glasstrier, the Swift Horse and the Wild Horse Pokemon respectively. Spectrier is a Pokemon that desires silence and isolation, only leaving its hideaway at night in order to steal the life force from sleeping individuals, fighting anyone who gets in its way. Glasstrier, however, is an incredibly active and aggressive Pokemon, using its incredible physical strength to take resources from other Pokemon. Both of these Pokemon are very arrogant, only serving those who they deem strongest in the land. In ancient times, they worked for Calyrex, who rode them like steeds as Calyrex protected the weak and the innocent. Despite their work with Calyrex, Spectrier and Glasstrier are ultimately very hostile Pokemon. They listen to no one and are among the very few Pokemon that will readily hurt anyone who tries to tame them. Groudon and Kyogre take up the next slot in this list. 3,000 years ago, Groudon and Kyogre were born from the powerful primal energy that was shaping the regions we see today. Groudon and Kyogre battled, the clash of land and sea creating the Hoenn region before being quieted by Rayquaza. This alone should give you an idea of the primordial strength these two Pokemon possess. Groudon possesses the power to cause massive droughts and volcanic eruptions, expanding the land by sapping the land of its moisture and oceans. Kyogre, in contrast, is said to bring water and rainstorms with its mere presence and is worshipped as a god for creating the oceans and causing downpours. When these two Pokemon meet, those same battles that created the Pokemon region are waged again, causing massive devastation to the ecosystem. Kyogre and Groudon are natural enemies, embodiments of nature that cannot be controlled, which is exactly what Team Magma and Team Aqua are forced to learn when they try to harness their potential for their own ends. Because of their destructive power and their reckless inherent animosity for each other, Kyogre and Groudon both take a place in the evil portion of our list. Next on our list is Hoopa, the Mischief Pokemon, as well as the Jin Pokemon. In its tiny form, Hoopa is merely a troublemaker at heart, using its hoops to gather things that it likes and somehow teleport them to a secret place. However, this is simply its confined form. In its unbound form, unlocked by using the prison bottle item in the games, Hoopa realizes its full potential. In this state, Hoopa is capable of summoning and capturing objects as big as castles, and it's known to warp space to evade capture. In the anime, Hoopa's unbound form, which is described as Hoopa's shadow, serves as a separate personality for the Pokemon. It's a malevolent force created by years of Hoopa being sealed within the prison bottle that would possess anyone to get revenge for being sealed away. While in this state, Hoopa could summon other legendaries, exerting its will onto them and forcing them to fight. While Hoopa in its confined form is ultimately a harmless thief, Hoopa's unbound form has been shown to be one of the most deadly and hostile forces in the Pokemon canon, putting Hoopa squarely in the evil portion of our list. Rising up from its slumber is Eternatus, the gigantic Pokemon. One of the largest ever recorded Pokemon, Eternatus, much like Deoxys, is a Pokemon whose origin comes from the dark depths of space 20,000 years ago. When Eternatus initially touches down on Earth, it lands in the Galar region and causes the Darkest Day, a day where Dynamax energy causes Pokemon to Dynamax and rampage uncontrollably. However, it's stopped by Zacian and Zamazenta, broken up into pieces and scattered among Galar in the form of wishing stars. Eternatus itself has control over Dynamax energy and is capable of either forcing or preventing Pokemon from being able to Dynamax themselves. Eternatus is actually capable of entering a step further beyond Dynamax, called Eternamax. In this state, it grows to over 328 feet, about 100 meters, in height, gains the ability to warp space and time itself, and creates a nigh infinite source of energy. Eternatus is directly responsible for nearly ending the world twice due to the Darkest Day, and is only stopped by the efforts of the protagonists, Zacian and Zamazenta, on both occasions. It's hard to tell what motives Eternatus has for going on a rampage as it has in the past, but it can be inferred that the Pokemon simply doesn't know better. In the Pokédex, its Eternamax state is described as being power overload, so one can suppose it doesn't want to be in that state any more than Galar does. However, because of the sheer damage that Eternatus can create when released, it ranks alongside the other deadly forces of nature in the evil category. Continuing our descent, we have Tornadus and Thundurus. These two Pokemon are part of the forces of nature right next to Landorus. Tornadus is capable of generating winds at 200 miles per hour, or 320 kilometers per hour, giving it the ability to blow down houses and cause wide-scale property damage. Thundurus has the power to summon thunderbolts, which it uses to cause forest fires. While they do serve an important purpose in stirring up and enriching soil, much like Landorus does, they both are hated for what their powers ultimately do to the surrounding area. They're both very quick to anger, can appear anywhere at any moment thanks to their incredible speed, and get into violent clashes in the span of seconds, causing massive hurricanes that can ruin surrounding towns and landscapes. The only reason these two aren't actively causing end-of-the-world scenarios is because Landorus keeps breaking them up. Tornadus and Thundurus' frequent outbursts, coupled with their radically deadly nature abilities, put them high up in the evil spectrum. Descending from on high is the Grim Reaper of the Pokemon world, Yveltal. Serving as the embodiment of death itself and the counterpart to Xerneas, Yveltal has the ability to steal the life energy around it through its wings. When it reaches the end of its lifespan, it steals life force before going into a cocoon-like state, revitalizing itself. Yveltal's power is ultimately selfish, in that it steals the life of other Pokemon in order to rejuvenate itself. However, it is the reason things die at all in the Pokemon world. As we mentioned before, without Yveltal, Xerneas would have nothing to counterbalance its immortality-giving properties. Without Yveltal, we would be forced to live with the effects of aging and our bodies giving out without ever having the ability to pass on. Yet, at the same time, without Xerneas, Yveltal would have no one to stop it from stealing the life of everyone on the planet, rendering it completely dead. Yveltal is ultimately a parasitic Pokemon, but the only thing keeping it from the far end of this list is the fact that we need Yveltal to keep us from living forever. It is a very tenuous relationship, in many ways more so than with Xerneas. This is what pushes Yveltal to the evil part of our list. Next up is the elusive Darkrai. Darkrai has the terrifying ability to control nightmares and can induce them in any individual that it wishes, human or Pokemon. While Darkrai tends to only use these powers for self-defense, it even feeds off of victims through these nightmares, which is particularly unnerving. Throughout continuity, Darkrai's allegiances have been hard to pin down. In its debut movie, Rise of Darkrai, the Dark Pokemon strikes a protagonist role, helping fend off Dialga and Palkia and supporting Ash as he tries to stop the creation gods from destroying a town. However, Darkrai really hits its evil stride in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Explorers of Time, Darkness Sky, where the Pokemon tries to cover the world in darkness by manipulating both Dialga and Palkia. Darkrai's shifting stance on the alignment scale, as well as its incredibly sinister powers, push Darkrai toward the more evil side of our list. Claiming the bronze medal of evil is the Ice Dragon Kyurem. In many respects, Kyurem is a Pokemon with a lot of issues. It's incredibly hostile and, according to old legends, would try to eat humans and Pokemon alike when they would wander around at night. By itself, the Pokemon is merely a hollow shell, requiring either Reshiram or Zekrom to be fused with it in order to reach its full potential. This Pokemon also has the dubious honor of being one of the few Pokemon to nearly kill a protagonist in Black 2, White 2 after being told by Getsis to do so and not even hesitating. While one could make the argument that Kyurem isn't evil at heart and is more of a wild animal even compared to most other Pokemon, Kyurem's track record for causing harm to others warrants the bronze medal of evil. Nabbing the silver medal of evil is the god of antimatter, Giratina, a terrifying dragon type from another dimension. Giratina is essentially the Pokemon world's version of the man downstairs. Giratina was supposedly banished to the Distortion World by Arceus himself, and being stuck there has only made them incredibly irritable and desperate to get out. Oftentimes, when Giratina breaks through to the Pokemon world, it involves the Distortion world and the Pokemon world merging in some way, causing catastrophic damage to both. In fact, in Pokemon Legends Arceus, Giratina serves as an antagonist. In the game, Giratina creates a space-time distortion that kickstarts the main conflict throughout the story, driving Dialga and Palkia into a frenzy and sending the noble Pokemon into their lord/lady states, causing serious trouble for the player character. In the final confrontation with Volo, a merchant who wants to attack and dethrone Arceus himself, Giratina appears to fight the player after the player defeats Volo. Giratina's potential for threat to the entire Pokemon world, as well as its vengeful nature at being cast out by Arceus, makes it deserve the Silver Medal of Evil, we'd say. Finally, earning the Gold Medal of Evil is Necrozma, one of the few Ultra Beasts on our list. Hailing from Ultra Space, Necrozma was originally capable of emitting light, but was injured by the ancestors of the Ultra Recon squad in order to steal its light. In the battle, Necrozma was left damaged and incomplete, creating a Pokemon that hungered for the light it could no longer create. Necrozma subjugated and consumed the light of Ultra Space, rendering the world a lifeless wasteland. The ravenous Necrozma supposedly did the same to countless other worlds, and ate the light from creatures such as Lunala and Solgaleo, evidently reduced to a cosmic parasite. It is only when the protagonist of Pokemon Sun and Moon stops them that this eldritch abomination is finally recontained and light is returned to the worlds that it had been stolen from. Long story short, Necrozma is the closest that Pokemon games ever get to creating Cthulhu. Necrozma's mindless hunger and the interstellar magnitude of the damage it causes up until it's finally stopped are why it easily wins the Gold Medal of Evil. And now for the Sinner Medals. The Gluttony Medal goes to Kyurem. People tell stories of how Kyurem eats man and Pokemon, and is one of the few, if only times, people are mentioned as being a Pokemon's main source of prey. The Pride Medal goes to Mewtwo. For the longest time, this guy subscribes to the idea that he's the strongest Pokemon to have ever lived. He'll only appear before people he believes might be possible challenges. If that's not arrogance, I don't know what is. The Sloth Medal goes to Regigigas and their smaller Regi counterparts. They just stand and wait for years until something pops by to bother them. Regigigas is also always seen sleeping. The Envy Medal goes to Giratina for harboring such a grudge against Arceus that it is ready to sacrifice the entire world Arceus had made just for its chance at taking the throne. The Greed Medal goes to Hoopa. This little guy stole whole castles with hoops just to snag the riches inside. Don't be a thief, Hoopa! The Wrath Medal goes to Thundurus and Tornadus. These two have been fighting since the beginning of time, more so than squabblers like the legendary Birds or Kyogre and Groudon, and they do it way more frequently. The Lust Medal goes to Enamorus. Their whole point is the idea that they encourage new life in the region it's visiting.